Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa, whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 3 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News, and we are taking a very close look at what's happening right now between Israel and Hamas. That war continues. We're going to take you to Israel, we're going to also take you to Gaza, but of course today is a global day of jihad, apparently. So, we're going to be live in Yemen, we're also going to be seeing demonstrations expected in Italy, in Washington, potentially in Paris as well. We will try to take you to all of those. Talking of Paris. In France, actually, there's been a stabbing from a man who was appearing to shout Allahu Akbar, stabbed a teacher at a school with a knife. It's not the only incident similar to that. Also reports of an Israeli diplomat in China being attacked as well. Very, very concerning times. And again, Jews in this country saying that they just do not feel safe on the streets anymore. So we'll be looking at all of that. But in other news, Nigel Farage will be joining me at 3:45 p.m. because he's been rebanked. Yes, he was debanked, so were so many other people. Well, he's now been rebanked. He will have all the details, and no doubt he'll be commenting on all of the other big geopolitical news as well. This is Patrick Christys, and this is GB News. Yeah, like I said, we are going to be taking you all around the world on the show today as we look at this International Global Day of Jihad, and we are anticipating some serious action taking place in Israel and Gaza. The world, I think, is on a knife edge. GBviews at gbnews.com, but right now, it's your headlines.
Patrick, thank you, and good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. It's 1 minute past 3. Here are the top stories. The President of the European Commission has arrived in Tel Aviv amid the ongoing conflict following Hamas's attack on Israel. Ursula von der Leyen offered her solidarity with the Israeli people. Meanwhile, the US Secretary of Defense says Washington's support for Israel is ironclad. In a joint press conference with his Israeli counterpart, Lloyd Austin said munitions, air defences and other equipment are rapidly flowing to the country and that the US stands ready to deploy further assets. Israel's siege of Gaza will make it impossible for humanitarian organisations to assist the massive displacement of people. That's according to the Red Cross. Israel has been dropping leaflets warning residents to move for their own safety and to distance themselves from Hamas terrorists. 1.1 million residents have been told to leave within 24 hours. The United Nations says such a move is impossible without devastating humanitarian consequence. Well, the First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, has posted a video on social media from his mother-in-law, a retired nurse, who's in Gaza.
Everybody from Gaza is moving towards where we are. 1 million people, no food, no water. And still they're bombing them as they leave. Where are we going to put them? But my thought is, all these people in the hospital cannot be evacuated. Where's humanity? Where's people's hearts in the world to let this happen in this day and age? And may God help us.
The Israel Defence Forces continue to amass tanks and soldiers near the Gaza Strip border, with a ground invasion looking increasingly likely. Tension is also building on Israel's northern border with Lebanon. IDF troops are on alert after the Hezbollah terror group said it would ignore calls for it to stay out of the conflict between Israel and Hamas. London has seen a huge increase in anti-Semitic incidents since the Israel-Hamas conflict, according to the Metropolitan Police. The force cited examples such as the playing of German military music and the intimidation of people outside synagogues. It comes as some Jewish schools in North London are closed today over concerns for children's safety. It's understood 3 Jewish schools in the capital are closed today until Monday. The government has announced an additional £3 million of funding for extra security for the UK's Jewish population. The Prime Minister says terrorism must not prevail in Israel or Ukraine. Rishi Sunak has been meeting Northern European allies in Sweden. The gathering comes amid concerns about the possible sabotage of an undersea gas pipeline between Finland and Estonia. He called the Joint Expeditionary Force the first line of defence against the threat posed by Russian President Vladimir Putin.
The value of this group is our agility, our expertise in the areas that matter, particularly in supporting Ukraine right now, which we'll talk about, but also our deep commitment to the cause of upholding the rules-based international system and, in particular, protecting the security of the region that is very near and dear to us.
A teacher has been killed and 2 others injured in a knife attack in France. The attack happened at a high school in the city of Arras in the north of the country. The suspect has been arrested. Police say he's a Russian-born Chechen and a former student of the high school where the attack took place. The EU is investigating the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter, after disinformation was spread in the wake of the Hamas terror attacks. In a letter sent to the platform's owner, Elon Musk, the European Commission said there were indications that X is being used to disseminate illegal content, despite being flagged by authorities. Elon Musk says the Commission should list its examples publicly, in spite of various media reports of questionable content. The investigation is the first under the EU's new tech rules on harmful content. In other news, Nigel Farage has been rebanked for personal and business accounts. Lloyds has accepted the GBNews presenter after 10 other banks rejected him. Nigel Farage was involved in a public row with NatWest in July after the group closed his bank accounts due to his apparent political views. He says he's pleased to see one high street lender isn't politically prejudiced. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's over to Patrick.
We should deport any foreign national who takes to the streets today and supports Hamas. Robert Jenrick, our immigration minister, has floated this idea. We shouldn't mess about. Let's check in, shall we, on how this global day of jihad is going so far. So there's been some footage of protests earlier in Jordan. Speeches, chanting, flags waving everywhere. There was guns in the crowd, military men. There were scenes like this as well in Yemen, in Iran, in Iraq, in Malaysia, in Bangladesh. In France today, a teacher was stabbed to death by a man reportedly shouting about Allah. In China, an Israeli diplomat was also reportedly stabbed as well. There are demonstrations set to take place in Italy and also in Washington in the States. We've seen some incredibly distressing scenes from Washington already, with Jewish university students breaking down after there was a pro-Hamas rally on campus. We'll play you a clip of that at some point. GB News presenter Josh Howie dropped his kids off at school today. He said that dropping children off at a Jewish primary school shouldn't feel like a brave act, but of course several other Jewish primary schools have closed today. We've been discussing scenes as well, which we've seen, of people tearing down missing posters of Jewish children. Our own state broadcaster refuses to call terrorists terrorists. Members of the Jewish community saying they just don't feel safe on our streets. What happened? What on earth happened here? Now, if you listen very closely, I think you can hear the world bubbling today, just simmering away. I, for one, am not willing to stand by and let this country tear itself apart. I, for one, am not willing to stand by and see a Jewish community that does not really have a safe space anywhere in the world, clearly, come under attack from a global gabble of ghouls. The way I look at it is this. We offered Jews safe refuge after the war, didn't we, here in Britain, and we promised them a safe existence. We have to uphold that promise, don't we? And if foreign nationals on British streets decide to support Hamas, a terror group, then surely they've got to go. Our police and our government have to do the right thing and stop being so timid. If tensions boil over tonight or over the weekend, they have to come down like a ton of bricks on the people supporting a terror group, not the people supporting their own right to exist. Well, that's what I think. I want to hear from you, of course. GBviews at gbnews.com. But let's kick off this afternoon with continuing on this conflict in Israel. It's been a dramatic day of events. More than 1 million Gazan residents have now been ordered to flee southward in just 24 hours by Israel. That deadline is looming ever closer. Charities on the ground say the request is impossible, while the United Nations says that it can't be done without devastating consequences. Again, the clock is ticking there, and that clock is due to run out at about 9 p.m. UK time, which may signal the start of a ground incursion. People in Gaza are now caught between Israel telling them to move and Hamas saying don't respond. And I think that needs to be emphasised as well. If Hamas is saying to its own people, you need to stay there. Now, Israel's bombardment of the Gaza Strip does continue. You'll be looking at footage of that now. Israel Prime Minister warns of difficult days ahead as he swears in his new cabinet, his war cabinet, while the country's top general admits that the military has failed to protect its citizens. Meanwhile, closer to home, 2 Jewish schools in northwest London are set to close temporarily because of safety fears over the ongoing crisis in Israel. Ministers have announced a £3 million package for a charity that helps protect Jewish community sites. We're going to go to Tel Aviv shortly, but as we understand from our man on the ground there, Charlie Peters, the air raid sirens have just started to go, so he's had to take cover. So we'll go to Tel Aviv shortly when it's safe for Charlie to do so. In the meantime, Lisa Hartle has been speaking with community members in North London about anti-Semitism, and it's live as well now in Golders Green. Afternoon, Lisa. Thank you very, very much. So what's been going on where you are? A heavily populated Jewish area in North London. What's happening there?
Hello, yes. Well, I've been speaking to members of the Jewish community here today, as well as in London throughout the week, and they've all said the same thing. They're heartbroken over the conflict, but also they're really concerned over what the implications could be for them back here. And as you said, there was that £3 million package that the government announced yesterday to that security organisation, CST, and they provide security for Jewish schools and synagogues. And they said over the last week alone, they've seen a rise of 324% in the number of anti-Semitic reports. I think we can hear now from a few of the people I've been speaking to here just about how they're feeling at the moment.
Well, I suppose like most other people, very concerned, and obviously we have to be wary of where we go, where we are, and be vigilant, and obviously much more than usual.
Very threatened, very worried. I've just taken my son to school. He's in Hasmonean, and he asked me to pick him up because he's worried, he's scared. And he's a 15-year-old. You know, this should not be happening here in England.
So obviously it's a concerning time. We're trying to live lives as normal as possible. I want to start off, I think everyone's got a legitimate right to protest and to campaign for what they feel is right.
Earlier this week, I spoke to the CEO of that security organisation, Mark Gardner, and he explained to me that security in Jewish schools is already so high, and he went into detail about how the windows have protective film over them. They have infrared technology, a 24-hour CCTV, as well as guards in schools and outside some police presence. He said, despite that, they are now upping that, so there's going to be extra guards, extra police presence at the beginning of school and the end of school. And as you said, there have been some schools that have closed today over those security concerns.
Lisa, thank you very, very much. I think it's deeply distressing for people to see the reality of what it's like for people on the streets of London, no doubt other areas in the UK as well, just fearing going out of their own houses. Lisa Hartle there in Golders Green for us. Thank you very, very much. I've just received an update from our man on the ground in Tel Aviv, Charlie Peters, who I think we're going to be talking to very, very shortly, in a couple of minutes' time, fingers crossed. Rocket fire in Tel Aviv is the latest there, so that is the breaking news. The sirens have gone off and rocket fire in Tel Aviv. That has just been confirmed to me by Charlie Peters, who is out there at the moment. Again, I want to emphasise, we'll go to him as soon as it's safe to do so. He's taking cover as we speak, so Charlie will be up in just a minute. We can go to other parts of Israel now, then, and I'm going to bring you some live footage of Ashkelon, which did come under quite significant fire from Gaza very, very recently. So that's the scene there at the moment. Of course, the Israeli bombardment of Gaza continues. There is a deadline for people to essentially get out of parts of Gaza. That deadline is set to run out at about 9 p.m. UK time tonight. I think we've got some footage of what Gaza is looking like at the moment. So it looks, of course, just at surface level there, relatively peaceful at the moment. What Hamas are saying to people in Gaza is stay where you are. Now, Israel has put a deadline on it, and it is expected that when that deadline runs out, we could well see a ground incursion. Charlie Peters is now available for us from Tel Aviv. Charlie, our GBNews reporter on the ground there. Yeah, thank you very much. So just confirm to me what was going on earlier then. So air raid sirens were going off and there was rocket fire, is that right?
That's right. About 20 minutes ago, the air raid sirens went off, actually as we were setting up to join your show. So of course we had to immediately get down to the shelter in our building. As we were going down the stairs, we heard some loud explosions overhead. We assume that's the Iron Dome air defense system, Israel's capability for intercepting rocket fire wherever it comes from. It was quite a heavy barrage. We heard several explosions above us. Roughly appears to be the same kind of distance as the rocket fire we were under in the same location just a couple of days ago. But yeah, 10 minutes in the shelter, as is the standard practice in Israel when under rocket fire. You take shelter, you wait 10 minutes, you wait for the all clear from the siren, and then back to normal life. Immediately after we came out of the shelter, everyone came with us, and people are back outside just beneath me, walking their dogs, going about their normal life as if nothing happened. It's just fairly normal for people in Israel at the moment.
Yeah, it's absolutely staggering, isn't it, to think that this can be classed as normal as we look at scenes of explosions taking place, rockets being intercepted in the sky. There is more than talk. There is an ongoing International Day of Jihad, which has seen a lot of Israel's near neighbours and countries kind of around that area, like Jordan and Yemen, of course, hold mass demonstrations. But, Charlie, what's the situation as we understand it in Gaza at the moment? So Israel has issued a deadline, have they, to basically say, get out of Gaza by this time. And then what?
Yeah, so it was probably the most dramatic news we've woken up to while we were here, actually, which was saying they want to evacuate all civilians in the northern portion of the Gaza Strip. They didn't say why, but if you've been following the attacks they've been running on Hamas locations in the Gaza Strip for the last 4 or 5 days, it's pretty clear what is going to follow. Massive bombardment of Hamas sites and the ability to use more significant munitions on those locations without fear of that awful phrase in war, collateral damage, civilian deaths in that area. Now, commentators in the area, analysts and indeed NGOs and charities on the ground have warned that such an extraction is impossible. There are just 2 main supply routes from the north to the south of Gaza. One is by the coast, where there has been significant artillery and rockets and airstrikes from the Israeli Defense Forces on Hamas positions, and one further inland. We're not sure of the state of that route, but still 1.1 million people leaving a location in 24 hours is difficult enough in normal times. In times of war, when there have already been heavy bombardments, 750 targets hit last night, 400 the night before, 200 the night before that, it's clear that this is now going to be something that many are calling impossible, to get all of those people down from the north below the Wadi Gaza, an area of wetlands about halfway down the strip. But leaflets have been deployed by the IDF across that northern region. They are sending messages on social media and on the televisions in Gaza to try and transmit that message that people have to go now. Hamas will use you as human shields to prevent these attacks.
Yeah, that's the concern, clearly. Charlie, thank you very, very much. You stay safe out there. We'll be going back to Charlie Peters in Tel Aviv as and when there are any continuing developments. What you're looking at there is, of course, shots of Gaza. That deadline to get out is looming. Just some news to bring you that we are potentially, it's a fast-moving picture, as I'm sure you can understand, potentially going to be hearing from Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Israel in the course of the next maybe half an hour or so. Some kind of joint statement coming from him and potentially the Qataris, actually. So we'll bring you more information on that as and when we get it. But, of course, we will try our best to take that live if possible. But as the Israel-Hamas war escalates and as the humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip worsens, I'm having a little look at some of the foreign aid disasters that have taken place here. We've seen that the European Union has supposedly given what they thought were water pipes to Hamas. They are being used as makeshift bombs and weapons and rocket launchers. We also have a look at that humanitarian crisis, like I was saying, in Gaza. And what can be done about that? Very mixed views on either side of this. Is Israel within its rights to withhold electricity, water and basic supplies to a strip of land from which an existential crisis for Israel is being launched? Or do they have a human and moral duty to keep the people of there in a situation where they can continue to survive? So we'll be talking about all of that very, very shortly. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News. This is Britain's News Channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You are watching and listening to me, Patrick Christys, right here on GB News. We're going to bring you some footage right now of Alma al-Chab in Lebanon, where this is just coming through to us now. Smoke is rising from the area by the Lebanon-Israeli border after Israeli military said it was firing artillery into Lebanon in response to a suspected armed infiltration. So just to bring you these shots now, just coming through to us here at GB News, smoke is rising from the area by the Lebanon-Israeli border after Israeli military said it was firing artillery into Lebanon in response to a suspected armed infiltration. So that is the latest there. Of course, we've already been bringing you scenes from Gaza. A deadline for residents of Gaza to get out is fast ticking away. I think that finishes at around 9 p.m. UK time. What comes after that, we will have to wait and see. But the massing of Israeli troops around that particular area continues as well. Air raid sirens in Tel Aviv, and we are expecting probably in about, well, it's scheduled, we'll have to wait and see, in about 10 minutes' time to hear from Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State. He is in Doha, where we are expecting some kind of statement from him on this ongoing situation. It's also worthwhile noting that we are in the middle of a global day of jihad, apparently, and you are just looking there at the continuing plumes of smoke, by the way, as the camera pans around from that Lebanon border. The Israelis saying that they were potentially about to face down an armed incursion from Lebanon. That would imply that Hezbollah are gearing up for some kind of action there. Look, obviously, as this conflict escalates and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza worsens, I am asking whether or not we should be providing aid, whether or not anybody should be providing aid, because according to new research, more than £2 billion of UK foreign aid aimed at helping poorer nations cope with things like the escalating climate crisis, well, it's been channeled through private consultancy since 2010. So 10% of foreign aid going through consultants like KPMG, Price, Waterhouse-Coopers, and of course the Adam Smith International, for example. Well, this comes as international aid groups are warning that they cannot deliver food and other basic services to the people in the Gaza Strip. Are we equipped as a nation to help provide aid? And actually, is Israel within its rights to try to block aid into Gaza at the moment? Joining me now is Defence Editor and Chief Foreign Affairs columnist at The Telegraph, it's Con Coughlin. Con, thank you very, very much. Yeah, what should the world be doing now when it comes to Gaza? Is Israel right, do you think, to be blockading it in the way that it is?
Well, I think this is a very challenging situation all around, Patrick. And certainly, you know, in the past, aid has been diverted in Gaza for other uses. And you made reference to pipes being used for makeshift bombs and everything else. I mean, I think if you just take a step back and look at the billions of dollars of aid that have been sent to Gaza in recent years by the Gulf states, etc., by the West, the idea was for that aid to be used to develop the Gazan economy, to provide infrastructure for the people of Gaza. And what happened? The vast majority of that aid went into developing weapon systems and building military infrastructure, which has now been used to attack Israel and provoke this crisis. So, you know, it is, of course, people want to see ordinary Palestinian families and children provided with the basics for existence. But the problem is Hamas controls Gaza. Hamas controls who receives what. And whenever aid in the past has gone into Gaza, Hamas has used it for its own nefarious
But it goes deeper than that, Con, as well. It goes deeper than that, Con, as well. We are hearing at the moment about Hamas potentially gearing up to use civilians as human shields, because Israel is telling them to get out of the Gaza Strip at the moment, Hamas telling them to stay where they are. So, you look at it like that and you think, well, who's contributing more to the loss of civilian life there? Is it artillery shells and Israeli bullets, or is it Hamas?
Well, one of the problems we have with Islamist groups like Hamas is because of their religious ideology, they don't really care much for human life, because if you get killed in conflict, then you go to heaven, etc. And so you have this very callous attitude. And of course, in propaganda terms, every Palestinian child or grandmother or whoever, any civilian that is killed in Gaza with this predicted Israeli offensive is a propaganda victory for Hamas. So that's how we see it. And we've been here before. I remember Saddam Hussein in a different context using human shields in the first Gulf War. It makes life very, very difficult. But it just shows you what we're up against, that we have this organization that's just committed the worst atrocity against the Jewish people since the Holocaust, and is now preparing to do the same against its own people. It's beyond belief.
No, it really is. And you, just to summarise, Con, you think that if aid was getting through to Gaza now, because we're about to see probably some absolutely horrific pictures and video footage of the humanitarian situation in Gaza that will almost definitely involve very young children as well. And that will make people feel rightly, disgusted, and where is the humanity in all of this? Are you of the view that if aid was getting through to Gaza right now, it probably wouldn't go to the people that it was intended to go to, do you think?
Well, I think that's the question we need to ask ourselves. I mean, I think people have talked about establishing humanitarian corridors. The Egyptian government has basically appealed for this. And if such a corridor could be established, and if there was a guarantee that the aid going into Gaza was going to the people who needed it and not to sustain the Hamas fighters and terrorists, then I think there's an argument for that. But the history of Gaza is Hamas controls Gaza, and they control who receives what. So, this is a very big problem, and I think anybody donating aid needs to sort of look at this picture with wide open eyes and just ask the question, is this much needed aid going to the people who deserve it, or to a bunch of terrorists?
OK, Con, thank you very much. Con Coughlin there, who is, of course, the defence editor and chief foreign affairs columnist at The Telegraph. I'm going to be having a look at the situation a bit closer to home as well. What's the situation for Jews like on the streets of Britain at the moment? Are we going to have nights of violence across the UK when it comes to this global day of jihad? What's happened in France? An individual, a teacher, was stabbed by somebody shouting Allahu Akbar. We've seen an incident not too dissimilar to that taking place in China, reportedly, as well. But there is loads more still to come between now and 4 o'clock, like Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has been speaking with allies in Sweden, with the Middle East being on top of the agenda, so we'll be discussing all of that. But right now, it is your headlines with Tamsin.
Thanks very much, Patrick. Here are the headlines at 3:31. There's no sign of mass movement of people in the north of Gaza after Hamas told people to ignore Israel's warning to leave. Meanwhile, Ursula von der Leyen has arrived in Tel Aviv this afternoon as the conflict threatens to escalate. The EU chief offered her solidarity with the Israeli people. Meanwhile, the US Secretary of Defense said Washington's support is ironclad during a joint press conference with his Israeli counterpart, Lloyd Austin. Well, clashes have erupted in the West Bank following Gaza solidarity protests. Israel is amassing tanks and soldiers near the Gaza Strip border, with a ground invasion looking increasingly likely. Tension is also building on the northern border with Lebanon, where smoke has been spotted. IDF troops are on alert there after the Hezbollah terror group said it would ignore calls for it to stay out of the conflict. Meanwhile, in France, a teacher has been killed and 2 others injured in a knife attack at a high school in the northern city of Arras. Local authorities are urging people to avoid the town centre there. The suspect has been arrested, and France's anti-terrorism office say they're now investigating. Well, those are the headlines, and you can get more on all of those stories. Just visit our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2157 and €1.1563. The price of gold is £1,574 and 10 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,633 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Yes, welcome back. Patrick Christys here on GB News. Just before we speak about the Prime Minister talking in Sweden, we do have some more footage for you of the Lebanon border with Israel, which, as you can see there, is now just completely engulfed in smoke. The Israelis are saying that they were trying to fend off some kind of incursion from there. That would be Hezbollah territory. Of course, the blockade of Gaza continues, and the time frame for people to get out of Gaza before a long-anticipated ground invasion. The clock is ticking very much there. So that's the latest. We'll bring you up to date, of course, with any more developments, as we can actually see explosions taking place before our eyes there, can't we? That is, again, the border between Lebanon and Israel, as the Israelis confirm that they are firing artillery into that region there to try to fend off, as they say anyway, some form of attack. Look, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has been attending the Joint Expeditionary Force Summit of Northern European countries in Sweden today. It comes as the PM's polling hits a record low after Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer's keynote speech at Labour conference shot his party to a double-digit lead over the Tories. So no conference bounce for Sunak, but very much getting glittered has done Starmer some favours. With us now is Olivia Utley, GB News' political correspondent. So, Olivia, yeah, let's deal with first things first then. So, Sunak is in Sweden. What's going on? Israel and the Middle East top of the agenda, is it?
Yes, so we were expecting this joint expeditionary meeting, as it's called, to be about the situation in Russia and Ukraine. It's a meeting between Rishi Sunak and 10 other Northern European leaders. They were supposed to be talking about energy security, about strengthening some energy partnerships in the hope that these countries can become less reliant on Russia for energy. But of course, as you say, the Middle East has ended up dominating the agenda. The lines coming out of that meeting this morning are all that all of these countries stand steadfastly behind Israel. But there is just a little note of caution creeping in. We've had both Rishi Sunak and James Cleverly, along with Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, and Emmanuel Macron, all saying that, yes, we are all completely behind Israel, but we must make sure we are just. And there is a warning that Israel should be allowing ordinary Palestinians to escape before any sort of ground attack takes place, as we are now expecting it to. But the message definitely is still that these countries, along with pretty much everyone in the Western world, is standing behind Israel.
No, indeed. And look, just from a purely domestic situation, Rishi Sunak in the polls, there was no conference bounce for him. There does appear to have been a conference bounce for Keir Starmer, especially after he fended off a glitter-bearing idiot.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the glitter bombing of Keir Starmer at conference is probably the best possible thing that could have happened to the Labour leader. He looked very brave, really, in dealing with it in the calm way that he did. And actually, the glitter looked rather good. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak had no conference bounce at all. It'll be really interesting to see how the Conservatives respond to that. In Westminster at the moment, speculation is that the election will be held next September, in about a year from now. on the grounds that Rishi Sunak is hoping that inflation settles down over the beginning of next year and that interest rates begin to go down, and that by this time next year, mortgage holders will be in a better situation and might be more willing to vote Conservative. Now that the Conservatives just simply seem to be sort of tanking in the polls, it gets worse week after week. It might be that Rishi Sunak decides to hold an election sooner, so a spring election in April or May, possibly thinking that, well, things can't get any worse. And of course, we're expecting local elections in May. And if the Conservatives get absolutely trounced there, then it seems quite likely that the election is Keir's for the taking. So I wonder whether Rishi Sunak will respond to these polls in the coming days, or whether he's going to hold his nerve and stick to the September election.
OK, Olivia, look, thank you very, very much. That's Olivia Utley there, who's GB News' political correspondent from our studios in Westminster. I just wanted to bring you up to date with some incidents that are continuing to take place now on that Lebanese border with Israel. Some quite concerning images coming out, appearing to show supporters of Palestine, I suppose, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah, we can't really tell at this particular stage, but supposedly trying to gain access into Israel. The shots that you're looking at now are Israel vehemently launching a volley of artillery into that area, saying that they are defending it from an incursion, which would chime in with this idea that there were people trying to cross that border. It is part of a so-called day of jihad, where the former leader of Hamas, which is, in case anybody needs reminding, a designated terror group, coming out and calling for the Muslim world, the Arab world, to unite. We then saw concerning scenes in Yemen, with thousands of people taking to the streets, people with guns and all of that going on. Similar scenes in Jordan as well. We've heard reports of action like that in Iraq, in Iran, in Bangladesh. But in Europe, there was also a slight concern because there was a teacher who has been killed and several other people injured during a knife attack at a school in France. Now, the knifeman was recorded appearing to shout the words Allahu Akbar as well, and that, of course, did come as Hamas called for a global day of jihad. So there we go. We will bring you the latest on that ongoing conflict in Israel. Plus, we will turn to France. As I was saying, a stabbing occurred, allegedly the perpetrator shouting Allahu Akbar. We'll get the latest on the situation there with somebody who is on the ground. So more on that France stabbing coming your way in just a few moments' time. I'm Patrick Christys. This is GB News. We are Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you.
every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other pay-per-review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio. Welcome back. It's 3:45. You're watching or listening to me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Now, as the Israel-Hamas war escalates, we will, of course, bring you the very latest as we get it right here on GB News. So don't go anywhere. We've got cameras set up, taking shots from Gaza, taking shots from various different parts of Israel, including Tel Aviv and that border with Lebanon, where explosions have just been heard. But closer to us here in Europe, a teacher has been killed and another 2 people have been seriously injured in a knife attack at a school in France. According to witnesses, the attacker shouted Allahu Akbar, which means God is greatest, during the attack. Now, French media reports say that he was a former pupil at the school. This does come in light of a former Hamas leader calling for a day of jihad, a day of global jihad. It's worth noting that yesterday in France, French authorities told any pro-Palestine or pro-Hamas protesters that their protest would be illegal because it breached the peace. When those protests took place anyway, this is how the police responded. If you're watching us on TV or online, they got the kind of smoke grenades out, they got the water cannons out, they got the riot police out straight away on the streets. Then, of course, today, we end up with a situation where at a school, a teacher is stabbed to death by somebody believed to be a former pupil, somebody, by the way, who, according to Reuters, was on a state watch list of people known as a potential security risk. That's according to a police source there. And apparently they were being monitored. Apparently he's 20 years old and had been in France since 2008. Joining us now for more information is Paris-based journalist David Chazan. David, thank you very, very much. What are we aware of, this situation involving a stabbing, an individual shouting Allahu Akbar and then supposedly killing a teacher?
Yeah, I mean, we know that one teacher is dead, 2 other people are seriously injured. One of them's been identified as a PE teacher and the other one is a canteen worker who is critically injured. They're both in hospital. The attacker has been arrested, and so has his brother, who was arrested near another school, along with a 3rd suspect near yet another school. And all 3 were on the terror watch list. So they were known to the authorities. They'd been flagged up as potential terrorists. And so a lot of questions are now going to be asked about how one of them was able to walk into a school armed with at least 2 knives when he was a known terror suspect. He had been on the terror watch list for 11 days. So police really did suspect that this was somebody who was about to launch an attack. His phone had been tapped and he had been followed. And it's emerged from a source close to the investigation that police actually spoke to him yesterday but did not arrest him.
Right. I mean, it is absolutely staggering then that we had 3 arrests at potentially 3 schools from 3 people on a terror watch list in France. As I understand it, people are still being told to avoid the Arras city centre, concerns that there may be other incidents at play. And it's impossible to ignore the fact, David, I think, that this does come 24 hours after the former leader of Hamas was saying that there should be some kind of global day of jihad. I mean, how is France bearing up to this at the moment?
Well, France is on tenterhooks, as many other people are, and the government's ordered stepped-up security at all schools throughout France after this attack. Jewish schools had already been given special protection, but I think there's something else very significant about this attack, because it comes 3 days before the 3rd anniversary of the beheading of a Paris teacher who had showed his pupils controversial caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad. Now, his killer, who was shot dead by police shortly after the attack, was, like the suspected attacker arrested today, of Chechen origin, and both of their families had immigrated to France from Russia. And so many people here in France are making that link between the anniversary of the beheading of the teacher Samuel Paty and today's attack. And it's revived terrible memories for a lot of people of the string of terror attacks that shook France starting in 2015. The worst, of course, was a terrible night of coordinated attacks on the Bataclan music venue, bars and restaurants, and the National Stadium that left 130 people dead.
Absolutely. David, thank you very, very much. I know that you're in Paris, I believe, at the moment, and potentially gearing up for another night of activity, shall we say, in Paris. I know that over here in the UK, many people are fearful that we're going to end up seeing potentially some unsavoury scenes, protest demonstrations. And how our police respond to it tends to be very different to how the French police respond to it. You guys were very quick over there to say that these protests would be banned because they are a threat to public order, and then the police tend to get the water cannons and the batons out and the smoke grenades out, don't they? Are you preparing for something similar to this evening, do you think, in Paris?
Well, we'll have to see. Last night, there was a pro-Palestinian demonstration flouting the ban that had been announced hours earlier, and police charged in with tear gas and water cannon. As you say, the French tend to send in heavily armoured riot police, and they don't hesitate to use tear gas and water cannon to break up protests, and they send the police in very large numbers. So we will see. The police are on alert across the country tonight in case there are further pro-Palestinian demonstrations, which have been banned on the grounds that the government considers they're a potential threat to public order.
Absolutely. Look, David, well, you make sure you take care, and thank you very much for coming on and explaining what's going on in France at the moment. It's David Chizan, who's a Paris-based journalist, talking about, that situation possibly about to take place in Paris tonight. Definitely did take place in Paris last night, and the way that the French police are handling it, but also, crucially, that a teacher has been stabbed to death in the French city of Arras after a man shouting Allahu Akbar attacked him with a knife. 2 other people arrested, all of whom believed to have been on a terror watch list, and potentially as well are Russian-born Chechens who we think came to France in around 2008. Rocket sirens are sounding in Tel Aviv at the moment. This follows Israeli orders for more than 1 million Gazan residents to flee southward in just 24 hours by Israel. That deadline is looming closer. Charities on the ground say the request is impossible. The UN says it can't be done without devastating consequences. People in Gaza are now being caught between Israel telling them to move and what is almost definitely going to come in terms of a ground incursion there, and Hamas saying, don't respond, you need to stay where you are. So Israel's bombardment of the Gaza Strip does continue, and the Prime Minister of Israel has warned that difficult days are ahead as he swears in a new war cabinet. The country's top general admits that the military has failed to protect his citizens. That clearly is coming down the line after the dust settles here, if the dust settles here. Let's go live to Gaza, shall we? There we go. So this is the scene in Gaza at the moment where citizens are being told to leave. We can see a little bit of smoke in the distance. Israelis are massing on the border. The Israel military is massing on the border there as well. I believe that we can also show you footage of the Lebanon border with Israel. We can. So earlier on I was saying to you that there was supposedly some kind of attempted incursion from Lebanon into Israel. That is Alma al-Chab, and smoke is rising from that area by the Lebanese-Israeli border. The Israeli military said that it was firing artillery into Lebanon in response to a suspected armed infiltration. So there we go. That's what's taking place there at the moment. We are going to take you all around the world as well a little bit later on. A reminder that we are supposedly going to see a pro-Israeli demonstration in Washington. That comes after a pro-Hamas demonstration at Washington University. We're also going to go to Italy, where supposedly we're going to see a demonstration taking place there. And we may well be hearing from Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who is in Doha at the moment. He is due, we think anyway, to give a statement, give an address on the current state of the Israel-Gaza conflict and what's going on in the Middle East as well, because we saw huge demonstrations in Yemen, and I know that many people fear that something is going to spill over here on the streets of Britain as well. We will be going to Golders Green, which is a predominantly Jewish area, where we're also going to be asking whether or not Jews are safe in this country as it currently stands. As ever, get in touch with your thoughts. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.com. I'll go to the inbox very, very shortly. I'm Patrick Christys. This is GB News, and we are, of course, Britain's news channel. Stay tuned.
Good afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Colder weather is on the way. We'll all notice the chill this weekend, even though many of us will see some sunny spells. A bit of a wet one out there this evening, however. A couple of weather systems, this weather front in particular, providing some heavy outbreaks of rain across southern parts of Wales, the Midlands, and increasingly through the evening over East Anglia and the South East. A lot of spray, a lot of surface water on the roads. We have a Met Office warning in place until 8 o'clock. That rain does, though, scoot out of the way, and then clear spells for many. Some showers keep going for Northern Ireland, North West England, North Wales, and it gets very windy tonight over northern Scotland. With the clearer skies and the colder air, it will be a chilly start to Saturday morning. Single figures for many. But also for many, quite a bit of sunshine. Southern Scotland, eastern England. A few showers over northwest England, north and west Wales, coming into the north coast of Northern Ireland too. One or two developing in the south through the day, but I suspect a good part of the south and east will stay dry and fine. Still windy across northern Scotland, but the wind's slowly easing, still bringing a chill, however. Only single figures here. Add on that wind, it feels colder, and temperatures in the south significantly colder than they have been. Certainly a cold start to Sunday with frost likely across parts of northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. There'll be a few showers keeping going across the north and the west, but again, for many places, Sunday looks dry and bright with some sunny spells, but much colder than it has been.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 4 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News, and we're going to keep you bang up to date with everything that's going on in this Israel-Hamas war. I can take you to Gaza right now, in fact, where there have been reports of explosions taking place. We can see smoke billowing in the background there, and just the other side as well of Israel, where we've had the Lebanese border under heavy artillery fire from Israel. So very much a battle on numerous different fronts. And it all comes, of course, doesn't it, amid a backdrop of a global day of jihad, which is been called for by the former leader of Hamas. What have we seen so far? Well, we've seen massive protests and demonstrations in Yemen, in Jordan, across Iraq, across Iran, vast swathes of the Middle East. We've also had protests in France. We're expecting demonstrations in Italy, which we're hoping to take to you a little bit later on. A pro-Israeli march in Washington, D.C. as well. And crucially, what on earth is going to happen on the streets of Britain? We can't ignore that as well. How should our police force respond as and when, if there are protests here this evening? In other news, we're talking about this as well. There's a backlash from the FA, so they're refusing to put the Wembley arch here in the Israeli colours. Now, there's form for this, OK? So we've done it for LGBTQ+, obviously, just before we went to Qatar. Then we've done it for Turkey. We've done it for France, when they had numerous different terror attacks there. So why are we now not doing it for Israel, in light of everything that's going on? Very controversial decision by the FA. We'll get into that. Something non-conflicty, though, which is Michael Gove piping up and saying we need more kids. So I'm going to be discussing that. How do we get the birth rate up? Why do we need to get the birth rate up? How on earth can we actually do that in the current economic climate? It's Patrick Christys, GB News. Yeah, as I've said, we're going to be zipping all over the world this hour with a variety of different live shots as the conflict in Israel and Gaza hots up, but also that global day of jihad kicks off as well. gbviews@gbnews.com is that email address. Get in touch with your thoughts. I'll get to the inbox shortly. But right now, it's your headlines.
A very good afternoon to you. It's 4:04. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. The President of the European Commission was forced to evacuate to a shelter after arriving in Israel this afternoon. Ursula von der Leyen there, you can hear the air raid sirens. She was meeting the Israeli President Isaac Herzog when the sirens went off, warning of possible strikes. Earlier, the EU chief offered her solidarity with the Israeli people after last weekend's attack by Hamas, which killed more than 1,300 people. Meanwhile, the US Secretary of Defense says Washington's support for Israel is ironclad. In a joint press conference with his Israeli counterpart, Lloyd Austin said munitions, air defences and other equipment are being deployed, with the US ready to provide further supplies. Well, Israel's siege of Gaza is making it impossible for humanitarian organisations to assist the massive displacement of people. That's according to the Red Cross. Israel has dropped leaflets warning residents to move for their own safety and to distance themselves from Hamas terrorists. 1.1 million residents have been told to leave within the next day. The United Nations says such a move is impossible without devastating humanitarian consequences. The Israel Defense Forces continue to amass tanks and soldiers near the Gaza Strip border, with a ground invasion looking increasingly likely. More than 1,700 people have died in Gaza as a result of Israeli airstrikes. Tension is also building on Israel's northern border with Lebanon. The IDF troops are on alert after the Hezbollah terror group said it would ignore calls for it to stay out of the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Meanwhile, London's seen a massive increase in anti-Semitic incidents since the Israel-Hamas conflict. That's according to the Metropolitan Police. The force cited examples such as the playing of German military music and the intimidation of people outside synagogues. Several Jewish schools in North London were closed today over concerns for children's safety. The government's announced an additional £3 million of funding to provide the UK's Jewish population with extra security. Well, the Prime Minister says that terrorism must not prevail in Israel or Ukraine. Rishi Sunak has been meeting northern European allies in Sweden. The gathering comes amid concern about the possible sabotage of an undersea gas pipeline between Finland and Estonia. He called the Joint Expeditionary Force the first line of defence against the threat posed by the Russian President, Vladimir Putin.
The value of this group is our agility, our expertise in the areas that matter, particularly in supporting Ukraine right now, which we'll talk about, but also our deep commitment to the cause of upholding the rules-based international system and in particular protecting the security of the region that is very near and dear to us.
A teacher's been killed and 2 others injured in a knife attack in France. It happened at a high school in the northern city of Arras. A suspect's been arrested. Police say he's a Russian-born Chechen and a former student of the high school. One of the teachers described what he saw.
We are all in shock. I discovered the horror of the situation when I left, since it was on my way out that I discovered one of our colleagues had been stabbed in the neck and died in front of the school. So, here we have a professor who was killed and another who was quite seriously injured.
The EU's investigating the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter, after disinformation was spread in the wake of the Hamas terror attacks. In a letter sent to the platform's owner, Elon Musk, the European Commission said there were indications X is being used to disseminate illegal content, despite it being flagged by authorities. Elon Musk says the Commission should list its examples publicly, that despite questionable content being reported in the media. The investigation is the first under the EU's new tech rules on harmful content. And Nigel Farage has been rebanked for personal and business accounts. Lloyds has accepted the GB News presenter after 10 other banks rejected him. Mr Farage was involved in a public row with NatWest in July after the group closed his bank accounts, apparently because of his political views. He says he's pleased to see one high street lender isn't politically prejudiced. This is GB News on TV, digital radio and on your smart speaker too. That's it for the moment. Now back to Patrick.
Lots to go out today. Let's kick off with this afternoon with the continuing conflict in Israel. It's been a dramatic day of events. More than 1 million Gazan residents have now been ordered to flee southward in just 24 hours by Israel. That deadline is looming closer and is believed to be coming to an end by around 8 or 9 p.m. this evening UK time. Charities on the ground say the request is impossible. The UN says that it can't be done without devastating consequences. But the people in Gaza are being caught between Israel telling them to move and Hamas telling them to stay. Israel's bombardment of the Gaza Strip continues, and in fact, in the last few moments, we brought you some footage of explosions taking place in Gaza. Israel Prime Minister is saying that there's difficult days ahead. He's swearing in his new war cabinet. The country's top general admits that the military has failed to protect its citizens. Now, very shortly, I am due to be talking to some people who have relatives who have been taken hostage by Hamas and are still being held hostage there. So I'm going to go to that shortly. But before that, I'm going to speak to GB News reporter Charlie Peters, who's live in Tel Aviv for us now. Charlie, what's going on?
So in the last half hour, we've had reports of the IDF responding to attacks in southern Lebanon with more artillery fire. We do know that they have tank artillery up there, which has been extremely busy in the last 72 hours. But Israel has been on the receiving end of rocket attacks again in the south. Explosions heard some 10 to 20 kilometers east of the Gaza Strip, and that really reflects the several fronts that this war is happening on. Israel is defending its borders from several directions. In the north, repelling attacks from southern Lebanon, and from Syria there has also been shelling and mortar fire. In the south, it's believed that the southern Israel portion of the country has now been secured insofar as there are no reports of terrorists operating in the area. As late as yesterday, the working assumption was that there is a realistic possibility that terrorists had gone to ground and were still capable of committing atrocities. Several more were arrested yesterday during those events. But even without active terrorists being reported in the last 24 hours, there are still reports of rockets. They come in thick and fast. The barrages are relentless in southern Israel. Ashkelon and Ashdod receiving attacks. Most of the rockets intercepted by the Iron Dome defense system, but some sneaking through. Up here where we are in central Tel Aviv, we've had more rocket attacks in the last hour, but also those were intercepted by the Iron Dome defense system, those explosions heard overhead. The Israeli reaction to those attacks has been precise and severe, with bombardments going down on the Gaza Strip all day after a 750 target attack overnight. It is what people in the military would describe as a target-rich environment, with Hamas storing all sorts of its military capabilities in the Gaza Strip, such as air defense assets, signals and radars, but also bunkers and personnel taking cover in residential areas as well. Where we are, we can hear fighter jets buzzing up and down this coastline constantly, refueling, rearming, heading south to bomb again.
Indeed. Charlie, thank you very much. It's Charlie Peters. We're going to go back to you, Charlie, quite soon, so make sure you stay safe. That's our man in Tel Aviv there. But the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has said the UK was working to provide support after Defence Secretary Grant Shapps said it seems very likely that there are British hostages in Gaza. This comes after Israel warned 1.1 million Gazans to leave the northern strip within 24 hours. Leaflets were dropped into Gaza City telling civilians to evacuate immediately. They've been told that for their own safety, they should head south to the Wadi Gaza. Now, Israel has been massing troops and armour on that border ahead of an anticipated ground offensive, but Hamas has told residents to ignore the warning and not leave their homes. I'm going to talk now to Lihi Jin, whose nieces 8-year-old Ella and 15-year-old Daphne are believed to have been kidnapped by Hamas. Lee joins me now. Thank you very much for coming onto the show. What's happened?
First of all, my name is Lihi, family teen. We are talking about Daphne, 15. Ella, she's 8. Correct, they are my nieces. 6:30 in the morning, we heard the alert. My daughter, 10 years old, called to her nieces, as usual, at the alert time to check if they are fine, because they are living really close to the border at Nahal Oz. And it was no answer. And then we tried ongoing. At the end, in one point, I received a photo from the Hamas telegram with Dafna's picture kept at Gaza, sitting on a mattress with clothes that not belong to us, and some sentence in Arabic. And I was sure that this is a Photoshop. I told to the person who sent me that they're just trying to make us weak. It's not correct. And he told me, Lee, it's correct. She's there. So I contacted my sister in order to let her know. I sent her the picture. And after a while, we received the other picture. You can see Ella as well. She got injured in her hand and at the head, at the face on the right side, the hand and the face. And they changed her clothes as well. She sat there with Dafna. The father was not there. His girlfriend as well, just the kids.
Okay, all right. So as far as you're aware, you have got photographs that show that they are okay at the moment, but they are injured, and you believe that they are being held hostage by Hamas, yeah?
We don't believe. Believe is not the correct word. We know that they are in Gaza. They are hostage in Gaza, together with another 200 people, babies, kids, Holocaust survivor, old people, women. There are 200 hostage. It's not belief. We know it. It's a fact.
And Hamas sent you photographic evidence then. So is there any way for you to communicate with them?
They put it on Telegram.
Right.
Nobody sent it to us.
Right.
It's on the Telegram. It was a live show on Facebook. The kidnapped was on live. Everything is on live and on Telegram. But we, of course, we didn't receive anything direct.
Gosh. What would your message be to Hamas now?
My message is play a fair game. Leave the babies, leave the kids, the women, the old people, the Holocaust survivor, the men, the risk soldiers. It's horrible to say. I'm sad for them as well, but at least this is the game. Make a fair game. Don't go in at the morning and kidnap people from home. This is not a game. This is not a war. It was a brutal attack. They took the head for 40 babies, and this is not a rumors. There is reporters. I believe your representative was there as well. Reporters all over the world came into one of the kibbutz on the border. I think it was I forgot the name, but all the reporters came to the kibbutz and saw it.
Yeah.
So there is 40 babies. They took the head. They chopped arms for women. They raped. And my both nieces are there. They are there alone, with no adult near them. So this is not a fair game. And my request from the Hamas is to be fair.
Okay.
To play a fair game.
And
of course, there's no pressure to release them. This is a fair game for me, of course.
Are you concerned, as we understand that the Israeli forces are going to potentially go into Gaza in the next 24 hours or so? You must be very, very scared about what that might mean.
I'm thinking only, I'm not the representative of the army, not the representative of the government. I cannot answer to your question. I'm thinking about the two girls, which supposed to be at home. We have army, and that's it. They are not the army. They are kids. They are kids. So
Okay.
I'm not going to answer the question. This is not my job.
No, well, I'm sure everybody watching and listening to this now is hoping definitely that you can get the resolution that you want.
I want to see them soon at home with Dikla, with Tomer, the 17-year-old kid from her previous marriage, with Noam, the ex-husband of my sister, the father of the girls, which got shot in the leg. I want to see all of them at home, and if they see me, I will tell to all of them, to Dafna, to Ella, to Noam, to Dikla, to Tomer, that we will do everything to bring them home. And I'm sending them strength and hugs and power and energy. And be strong. We are strong here for you.
Okay, Lee, look, thank you so much for coming on, and all the best.
Thank you for the stage.
Yeah, we want to stay in touch with you and see if we can keep highlighting this issue. So thank you very much, and all the best, and God bless as well. As Lee Heejin knows, two nieces, 8 years old and 15 years old, are under hostage, are being held hostage by Hamas. Grief. Okay, so people are protesting all over the country at the moment, or are due to, anyway, sorry, I should say, this evening. But how are police dealing with a potentially spiralling situation? I'm joined now by former Met Detective Peter Blexley. Peter, a little later than planned, obviously for good reason there. Yeah, tonight we're sitting on a bit of a powder keg. I know a lot of people are a bit concerned that we might end up seeing a variety of different problems on the streets of Britain. How should our police force deal with it?
Well, thus far, I think credit where credit is due. The Metropolitan Police have increased their patrols around synagogues and the like, and other heavy populated areas of London where there are lots of Jewish people. Unfortunately, we have seen a considerable spike, an additional 650 incidents, not all crimes, but incidents, that the Met have released those figures today.
Anti-Semitic incidents, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. And of course, London is a global city. There are people here from every corner of the planet. Unfortunately, because of our appalling immigration record of late, there are people living in this country, living in this city, who we simply do not know who they are. We do not know what their intentions are. We don't know where they live, and we don't know their backgrounds. That's a fact. And of course, will some of these people who perhaps have bad intentions and support terrorist organisations, will they spill out onto the streets tonight to essentially turn what might be peaceful protest into disruptive process? I hope not, but we'll have to wait and see.
OK, all right. So at what point would you like to see the police swoop in, I suppose? Because it's all very well and good sitting back, isn't it? But if we end up with people driving around London in their cars with, whatever flags that they've got, shouting abuse at people massing at an Israeli embassy, for example, I think there's going to be some demonstrations tomorrow as well. I mean, at what point is it the right point for the police to start going in and making arrests? Because I suppose the downside of that is that could make it kick off even more, couldn't it?
Well, recent policing has decided, and I think with some justification here, that at many types of protests, it is actually better to gather the evidence, to film these people, to get their faces on camera as they're committing their disruptive or their criminal acts, and then later identify them and giving them a knock on the door sometimes afterwards, because it can be very difficult with substantial crowds of people to form a snatch squad, for want of a better expression, to kind of drive a corridor where officers can go in to a massing disruptive crowd and drag people out.
Yeah.
That in the past has proved to be very problematic, so the police often gather the evidence and make arrests afterwards. The Met Police here and possibly other police forces around the country, if protests crop up in other cities, are going to have to walk a very, very difficult tightrope here. And in many regards, they have my sympathy. Rest assured, the TSG, the Territorial Support Group, are primed, are ready, will be just round the corner. Their public order kit, otherwise known as the riot kit, the shields, the helmets, the visors, the protective clothing, that will all be at the ready, and it will be deployed if senior officers go, enough is enough, this has to be quelled.
OK, Peter, thank you very, very much. Peter Blexley, their former Met detective, just looking ahead to scenes that we hope don't happen this evening around the UK. But footage has emerged of 2 women taking down posters of children kidnapped by Hamas in London. I will be speaking very shortly to the student who filmed this incident, who now fears for her faith after receiving verbal abuse. You will not want to miss that. I'll be speaking to the lady who filmed that incident. Patrick Christys, GB News, Britain's News Channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio. Shocking footage emerged of two women tearing down posters of innocent Israeli children taken hostage by Hamas, with one of the women shouting, "This is for Palestine." This footage went viral yesterday, didn't it? There we go. We can see it happening right now. Well, the British-Israeli woman who filmed the encounter has revealed she received verbal abuse while putting the flyers up in North London. Nita Farage fled Israel for Britain just days ago, but is now scared to show her Jewish faith in public. Joining me now is the student who filmed that very incident, the lady I was talking about there, Nita Farage. Thank you very much for joining me. How are you?
I'm okay. Okay, as can be, yeah.
Okay, could you just talk me through what happened then? So these posters were put up, and what did the posters show, and then what went on after that?
So essentially they were flyers which showed pictures of hostages which have been kidnapped by Hamas, including babies as young as several months old and elderly people, essentially innocent civilians. And what we did is basically follow an initiative which started in New York, which involves basically hanging up these flyers around London to, one, raise awareness and increase international pressure to try and free these hostages, and two, to gain international recognition of Hamas as a terrorist organization. And
yeah, and then talk me through what happened then. So then these ladies turned up, did they?
Yes, so we each got assigned an area. There are approximately 42 areas around London. I was assigned to Morrington Crescent, and I was hanging up the flyers. And after several different incidents, including ones which I didn't catch on camera, 3 people, I didn't manage to catch all 3 of them in the video, came and they started tearing down the leaflets. One of them came up to me, he stuck his middle finger up at me whilst shouting "Free Palestine," very aggressively. And then I saw somebody else, an onlooker, filming, so I quickly got my phone out and filmed the second half of the incident, which is what you can see in the video.
Okay, so yeah, talk to me a little bit more about the things that you didn't manage to get on camera then. So you were aggressively approached, were you? And did this happen quite quickly? And can you just tell me how that made you feel? Because we do live in a free country, we do live in a multicultural country, and we do live in the kind of country where you should be able to put flyers up without immediately being abused like that.
So when we were given guidelines on hanging up the flyers, we were given several safety tips, including only hanging up the flyers in groups. And I was waiting for my parents to join me, but I decided to start leafleting anyway. And I was a bit stressed, so I folded the flyers over, and I was following the guidelines of just not making eye contact and quickly doing it. But obviously you still get attention whilst you're doing it because people are curious what you're hanging up. So a man approached me and he asked me what I was hanging up. He read the leaflet and he started shouting at me that this is karma for the Jewish people. They've gotten what they've deserved. That people have brought this upon themselves. And I didn't engage because I was by myself, and also I've been in Israel this week and I managed to get back 2 days ago, and I just didn't have the emotional capacity to deal with the interaction. And afterwards, my mum joined me, and we started flying over the tube station. And that's when the 3 people came up, which started with one of them putting his middle finger up at me and getting very near me. And,
Okay, and how do you feel about walking the streets now or visibly demonstrating your faith? I don't know, I can't really quite make out. I mean, if there's some kind of necklace there with a Jewish symbol on it, I don't know if that's what that is, but I know people personally who have decided to take those off today, for example. So how are you feeling about that?
So I'm not currently wearing anything which visually distinguishes me as Jewish, but obviously inherently it's a very stressful situation because we're talking about sympathy for a terrorist organization, which is basically sympathy for extremist fundamentalist actions, it's a lack of compassion for war crimes and crimes against humanity which have been committed against innocent civilians, and an intolerance to accept the fact that this conflict is immensely two-sided, and if you're an advocate for human rights, then you are knowledgeable of the fact that both sides have legitimacy. And it's just stressful. It's stressful to be around people who put their hatred for a specific group of people above their own moral compass and their own rational political views. I don't understand how putting up pictures of innocent children and elderly people who have been not only murdered and kidnapped, but also tortured in just atrocious ways. I don't understand how that harms the Free Palestine movement. It's beyond my understanding. I just think the hatred is above people's own ability to rationally understand the situation.
Can I just ask you quickly, final question? We've heard calls for this, whatever this means, this global day of jihad and stuff, and we've seen demonstrations in London recently and other parts of the UK. What are you and your family and your community feeling like as tonight approaches? Will you be going out?
We have plans to take part in several initiatives which are helping people who are trying to currently escape from Israel, so we will be doing that. But it's obviously extremely stressful. There are Jewish schools who are not opening until Monday because they're worried about the situation. When I stepped off the plane, when I landed on a flight back from Israel, and I got given a flyer which is from the Met Police, which is basically tips on how to cope with terrorist attacks, and also Met Police officers were there to provide support for people who were returning, and also people in the UK who are worried about any upcoming terrorist attacks. The CST, which is an organisation which essentially works closely with the police in order to address anti-Semitism in the UK, is on increased surveillance. And
Look, thank you for coming and talking to us and having the bravery to put yourself forward like this as well. Good luck, all the best to you and your family, and I do hope to talk to you again very, very soon. Snita Fabish there. It's remarkable, isn't it? Being given leaflets about how to deal with a terror attack in this country, but there we go. Loads more thoughts come between now and 5 o'clock. Despite the UK condemning the controversial Rwanda scheme, it does seem as though the United Nations have taken matters into their own hands. Believe it or not, they are continuing to send refugees to Rwanda, but I thought they said this was a little bit too dangerous. Don't miss that one. But first, a little bit later than anticipated, is your headlines with Aaron.
It is 4:34. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Thousands of Palestinians are fleeing northern Gaza, having been told to head south by the Israeli Defense Forces if they want to live. It is as a ground invasion looks increasingly imminent in Gaza. Meanwhile, the EU chief Ursula von der Leyen arrived in Tel Aviv earlier to show solidarity with the Israeli people. Her meeting, though, with the Israeli President Isaac Herzog was interrupted by air raid sirens. Meanwhile, the US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin says Washington's support for Israel remains ironclad. Clashes have erupted in the West Bank following solidarity protests. Israel is amassing tanks and soldiers near the Gaza Strip border. As we mentioned, that ground invasion looking increasingly likely. But tensions also building on the northern border with Lebanon, where smoke has been spotted. IDF, that's the Israeli Defense Force troops, they're on alert there after the Hezbollah terror group said it would ignore calls for it to stay out of the conflict between Hamas and Israel. President Macron of France says a knife attack on a school in the northern city of Arras was the result of barbaric Islamist terrorism. The fatal stabbing left one teacher dead and 2 others injured. Macron added that police had helped foil another attempted attack elsewhere in France. More on all of our stories on our website, that is gbnews.com.
Welcome back. OK, so potentially, quite soon anyway, we are expecting Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who is giving an address in Doha in relation to the ongoing situation with Israel, Gaza and, frankly, the world now. So we might throw to that in a few moments' time. So keep your eyes peeled for that. That will be massive, really, because that was probably going to outline how America are going to respond to this and continue to respond to it going forward. We've seen demonstrations in Yemen, we've seen demonstrations in Jordan, we've seen conflict on that Lebanese border with Israel. We are seeing explosions taking place on the Gaza Strip. We are seeing an evacuation attempt from Gaza and a potentially imminent Israeli incursion into Gaza. So, yes, we should be hearing the American angle on this very shortly, which I think will be important, won't it? But despite condemning the UK's Rwanda scheme, it seems that the United Nations may have been copying our homework. So the UN is continuing to send refugees to Rwanda, despite telling the UK the country is far too dangerous for channel migrants. Figures show the organisation has sent 1,737 refugees to Rwanda since 2019, including 134 just 4 months ago. So whilst they are telling us that we can't send them there because it's too dangerous, they are literally sending 134 people. This is part of course, its flagship emergency transit mechanism. Joining me now is former Chief Immigration Officer of the UK Border Force, Kevin Saunders. Kevin, thank you very much. Does this not just make a mockery of all of the criticism of our Rwanda scheme? The United Nations saying you can't possibly do that. Meanwhile, they are doing it.
Yes, it is absolutely doublespeak, isn't it? And I would imagine that the justices at the Supreme Court will have paid attention to that, because it really does shoot the defence of the appeal court judgment straight out the window, doesn't it? It really does. So it's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous.
It's bonkers, the idea that we can be caring so much about people's human rights, being lectured to about it by an organisation that is perfectly happy to send 134 people to that country on top of the 1,200 and so that they've sent in recent years. I suppose, Kevin, yeah, what you're saying there is that you think that we should just crack on, really. If it's good enough for the United Nations, which it is, then it has to be good enough for us.
Yes, I mean, when I looked at the figures this afternoon and saw the numbers from 2019, it's not just something that happened yesterday. This has been going on for some time.
Yeah.
So, to me, it means that Rwanda is a safe country, and everybody knows it's a safe country, and let's just get on with it.
OK, all right. And, Kevin, you're absolutely spot on in the sense that, you know, again, Suella Braverman stood up, didn't she? She stood up in Washington, D.C. and she said, hey, look, please, can we try to change the definition of what a refugee is? Just because so many people are coming here at the moment that aren't really refugees, but under the current definition, they are. Can we do something about that? And the United Nations basically said, no. Absolutely not. She said, right, well, we're going to press ahead with Rwanda. Can we do that? We think it's a safe country. The United Nations says no. And then the United Nations continues to send people there. I do find that absolutely staggering. Look, Kevin, thank you very much. It's great to have you on the show. It's Kevin Saunders there, who's the former Chief Immigration Officer at UK Border Force, just reacting to that news that more than 1,700 refugees have been sent to Rwanda by the United Nations. I suppose for them it might have been a good day to try to bury that news, but no, alas, we wouldn't let that slide here on GB News. Now, I'm told that we are going shortly, OK, to US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who is set to begin speaking in Doha in Qatar, alongside the Qatari Prime Minister and Foreign Minister. This is, of course, in relation to the ongoing situation in Israel and Gaza. I'm hoping that we might be able to show some shots, any live feeds that we have currently of Gaza or Israel. There were some explosions that were taking place in Gaza just a few moments ago, and also around the Israeli-Lebanese border as well, just to give a flavour of what's happening on the ground right now. This is Gaza at the moment. Look, nightfall is coming. Again, I want to emphasise that as explosions are actually happening right this second. So if you are watching us on television or online, if you're listening to us on radio, keep doing that. But if you can, at some point, do turn your television sets on, because we are seeing now live fire in Gaza. The Israelis have told the citizens of Gaza, the civilians who were there, to get out, basically. But Hamas are telling them to stay. We can see some flashes in the distance there, whether that's artillery fire or gunfire. It's not immediately obvious. Our man in Tel Aviv, Charlie Peters, will no doubt be keeping an eye on this very, very shortly for us. We'll go to him. But the conflict there is raging anyway. That deadline for citizens to get out of Gaza, it runs out at around 8 or 9 p.m. UK time. So charity groups on the ground, human rights groups on the ground, they've said that that's nowhere near enough time to get all of these people out. Of course, the fact is that the government, if you want to call it that, the terrorist organisation really in charge of Gaza, Hamas, is telling its own citizens not to get out of there. We are anticipating that there will be a ground incursion by Israeli forces into Gaza there in the coming hours. Quite possibly. We will bring you footage of that if it happens right here on GB News, but we can see as night is falling, flashes in the background. We've seen a couple of large explosions in the last few moments. But there are other live shots as well coming to us from around Israel. We had Ashkelon before as well. Now this is where Ashkelon is right now. So Ashkelon, again, night falling there clearly, but this was the scene of fierce rocket fire from Gaza earlier on. The Iron Dome working overtime. Apparently 90% of rockets were stopped. We can go now to hear from Secretary of State, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who is beginning his speech in Doha alongside the Qatari dignitaries.
Qatar has been a very close partner to the United States on a broad range of issues that are crucial to both of our countries and to this region. From working together on evacuating Americans, Afghans, and others from Afghanistan, to cooperating very closely in responding to humanitarian emergencies like the devastating earthquakes in Turkey and in Syria. We're meeting today at what is a difficult but also consequential time for the region. In the wake of Hamas's appalling attack, killed more than 1,300 Israelis, at least 27 American citizens, and people from more than 30 countries. The United States and Qatar share the goal of preventing this conflict from spreading. We discussed in detail our efforts to prevent any act, state or non-state, from creating a new front in this conflict. We're also working intensively together to secure the release of hostages, including American citizens, being held by Hamas in Gaza. I'm grateful for the urgency Qatar is bringing to this effort. I had an opportunity to meet yesterday with the families of some of those being held hostage by Hamas. Their anguish is profound. They're desperate to bring their loved ones home. We are working urgently on that effort. We're doing that with Qatar, and we're doing that with allies and partners across the region. As Israel continues to respond to Hamas's devastating attack, the United States will ensure that it has what it needs to defend its people. Secretary of Defense Austin was in Israel today, doing just that, working closely with the Israelis to make sure that we're providing them what they need, and we'll be able to do that on an ongoing basis. At the same time, we're in constant communication with Israeli officials and with multilateral and international organizations, humanitarian organizations, including the United Nations agencies, including the ICRC, to get aid to civilians in Gaza. As I said yesterday in Tel Aviv, Israel has the right, indeed it has the obligation, to defend its people and try to ensure that Hamas can never repeat what it's done. We continue to discuss with Israel the importance of taking every possible precaution to avoid harming civilians. We recognize many Palestinian families in Gaza are suffering through no fault of their own, and that Palestinian civilians have lost their lives. We mourn the loss of every innocent life, Israeli, Palestinian, Jew, Christian, Muslim, as well as civilians of every faith and every nationality been killed. Let's not lose sight of why this is happening. Israel is conducting operations in Gaza because Hamas carried out terrorist attacks that killed, in the most horrific ways, 1,300 of its people. Hamas terrorists slaughtered, raped, mutilated, tortured, burned innocent civilians, from babies to the elderly, men, women, boys and girls. Now, efforts to get humanitarian aid into Gaza are complicated by the fact that Hamas continues to use innocent civilians as human shields and is reportedly blocking roads to prevent Palestinians from moving to southern Gaza out of harm's way. We know the humanitarian situation is urgent. We're actively engaged with partners, including Qatar, to get aid to those who need it. Your Excellency, thank you again for today's very, very good discussions and for all the work that our countries have done together. Thank you.
نفتح الآن المجال للأسئلة. السؤال الأول موجه باللون العربي.
Okay, so that was Antony Blinken there, the US Secretary of State. He's talking in Doha in Qatar alongside the Qatari Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister. I am hoping that I am now able to show you footage of Gaza where, as I understand it, we are about to see... so Gaza is on your right-hand side there. Now, whilst Antony Blinken was talking, there were a series of large explosions that took place in Gaza. I think very timely, isn't it, that you've got the US Secretary of State there. Now, I'm going to reiterate to you a couple of things that he said. He said in no uncertain terms that Hamas tortured, raped, mutilated and burned people, Israeli citizens, after having taken them hostage and after having entered Israel as well. He also said, reiterated, of course, that Israel has an obligation and a right to defend itself, but he again stressed that Hamas is using its own citizens as human shields in order to try to prevent Israeli attacks. Whilst he was saying that, a series of explosions did take place in Gaza. I know it's difficult to make out because it's night time there in Gaza at the moment, but you can see, I think, just about several plumes of smoke rising above that Gaza skyline. There we go. More explosions taking place as we talk. The bombardment of Gaza by the Israelis is stepping up a notch. The time frame given to the people of Gaza to get out before a widely anticipated ground incursion is running out. We think that it's only got a couple of hours left, potentially. So we're going to see a lot of action in Gaza very, very shortly. We're also going to be seeing action from the other side of Israel as well, by the Lebanese border. Those explosions continuing right now in Gaza. We'll bring you the very latest on that ongoing conflict, including the reaction from back home here as well. Patrick Christys on GB News. This is Britain's News Channel. Don't go anywhere.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M20.
Welcome back. Patrick Christys here on GB News, and we're just going to go live back now to the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who has been talking in Doha. He's alongside, as you can tell, the Qatari Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister. I just want to emphasise a couple of the things that he said there. He said that Israel, of course, has a right to defend itself. He says that he has seen evidence that Hamas have tortured, raped, mutilated and burned people in Israel. He's very concerned about the ongoing hostage situation. And as he was talking, Israel continued a bombardment in Gaza, which I'm hoping we'll be able to bring you some shots of Gaza very shortly, where a series of explosions were taking place. We are expecting there to be a ground invasion potentially very, very soon. But look, closer to home, a rabbi working on a football association faith group. Those are images of Gaza now for you, by the way. We're going to leave those on the screen. But a football association faith group has resigned over the governing body's response to the Hamas attacks on Israeli citizens last weekend. Alex Goldberg told the FA that he was profoundly disappointed that there were no plans for a specific tribute to the victims of these attacks. The body's refusal to light up the Wembley Arch in the Israeli flag colours ahead of the friendly between England and Australia tonight was also criticised by the government's independent advisor on anti-Semitism. I'm joined now by a friend of Rabbi Alex Goldberg, who did resign, of course, from the FA faith group, Richard Ferrier, who is the editor of the Jewish News. Richard, thank you very, very much. So, do you think it is a disgrace that the Wembley Arch will not be lit up in the Israeli colours?
Look, I'll come to the FA decision in a second, but I just begin by saying that what is happening in Israel and in Gaza is horrific on a scale that none of us thankfully can imagine. There are victims on both sides living through hell. I know as a member of the Jewish community that my community, my family and my colleagues have never known a time like it. It's the darkest week of our lives. Israel's reaction has been furious. It has been furious in a way that I would be furious if someone had raped my child to death. That's how furious they are. So with that said, perhaps I'm naive to think that the FA would feel that that they would, and they have routinely lit up the Wembley Arch for pretty much every good cause I can think of ever since the new Wembley Stadium was built, 10, 15 years ago. I honestly, truly thought, as did most Jews in this community, think that they would show moral character, show football fans, Jewish football fans like me, some compassion. Well, the FA has revealed its moral character. It's pretty dark and ugly.
Should obviously be doing it. I mean, there is a precedent. We've had the LGBTQ plus flag, we've had the French flag, we've had the Turkish flag. It is cowardice, isn't it?
Well, they've got vested interests, of course. You know, we're not naive, and don't get me started on the moral backbone of football. I mean, for one thing, what's the country that hosted the 2022 World Cup final? It just happens to be the same country that's currently shielding the Hamas leaders who brutalised all those people, Qatar. That tells you everything you need to know about world football, Patrick. Look, not since the Holocaust have Jews been slaughtered in such numbers. I just wonder, would Wembley have been lit up had it had an arch in 1945? in honour of the 6 million Jews, or would the FA have equivocated to avoid alienating its German sponsors? That's the question I think a lot of Jews are asking this evening.
It is. Look, Richard, can I just ask you, sorry about it, it's a fast-moving picture here. Could you just stay on the line for me, please? We're going to go back to Doha and Qatar now, where Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, is talking. Just take a bit more of what he's saying.
Our focus now is on helping to create safe zones, and we're doing that with the leading international organizations. We're doing that engaged with Israel, and we're working with other countries to that end. So that's where our focus is. We think this is the best way to make sure that civilians who are caught in a crossfire of Hamas's men can be safe and receive the assistance they need. Thank you.
السؤال الأخير موجه من
Final question from Bloomberg.
Mr. Secretary, I know the situation in Israel is highly charged and very fluid, but are you worried about the medium and long-term consequences of what's unfolding in Gaza? Are you worried that Israel may be simply retaliating in a fury because of the horrendous nature of these attacks and might not have a medium or long-term plan? And secondly, I'm wondering, how worried are you about a second front in this war? Iran and Hezbollah have already made threats of opening this new front if attacks on civilians or an Israeli blockade of Gaza continues. What would the U.S. response be if Hezbollah ramps up its own attacks, for instance, in response to a ground invasion? And Sheikh Mohammed, the U.S. and Israel are both struggling with this tragic and fluid hostage situation that the Secretary was talking about, and have looked for Qatar to help navigate it. Can you tell us about your engagements with Hamas? And are you optimistic about getting these people back alive, given reports that some of them may have already died in Israeli strikes on Gaza? And secondly, there have been rising criticism and protests across the Arab world as Israel's retaliation continues. What's your view of how Israel is conducting its military response? And are you worried about the potential? Are you also worried about the potential for medium and long-term consequences of what's happening? Thank
you. Ian, thank you very much. First part of the question: no country can tolerate having a terrorist group slaughter its people in the most unconscionable ways and live like that. What Israel is doing is not retaliation. What Israel is doing is defending the lives of its people and, as I said, trying to make sure that this cannot happen again. And I think any country faced with what Israel has suffered would likely do the same thing. Imagine if this had happened in the United States. So that's what is happening. Of course, it's important to think about, as one might put it, the day after and where this goes. And I believe that is part of Israel's thinking as well as our own and the thinking of many other countries in the region. Because one thing is for sure, we can't go back to the status quo that allowed this to happen in the first place.
OK, so look, we are listening there a little bit anyway to US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The feed is not that good from Doha at the moment. I'm going to go back to Richard Ferrer, who is the editor of the Jewish News. Look, thank you. I don't know how much of that you managed to get, but he was asked a question about the ability to get hostages back and whether or not the United States is doing anything to negotiate with Hamas. What do you make of all of that?
Look, I would hate to speculate. I only know the ghastly, gruesome truth of what Hamas is, what it's capable of, and the reason that they took those people. The ground invasion, it would expect, is going to happen in the next 48 to 72 hours. The questions, the task of moving all these people south is obviously impossible, and Israel must clearly know that. As I said, the horrors that the Palestinians are currently going through is absolutely unspeakable. But the fate of the hostages, I don't want to say, because we know what Hamas is, we know what they've done, we know what they intend to do.
Yeah, I had quite a moving interview earlier on with a lady whose 2 young nieces are currently being held by Hamas, and I just can't imagine what must be going through people's minds. So I've got to ask you this, Richard, really. Do you think it is proportionate for Israel to raise Gaza, which, you know, may well be about to happen?
What is proportionate to baby beheading?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, we've been here many times before. We were here in 2014 when Israel, to use a colloquial term, cut the lawn. But obviously now the entire pitch needs to be ripped up. It's an impossible war because it's very much the same sort of challenge that I think the Allies faced in 1945 when it came to denazifying Europe. They're going to have to de-Hamasify the West Bank. But quite frankly, how that's done, because there are so many satellite countries within the Middle East, you know, there are so many sponsors. And then, of course, you've got this dark cloud of Tehran. Hamas is basically an Iranian militia. So, and then, of course, you've got Hezbollah in the north. Israel is hemmed in by despots, dictators, and people that don't want Jews within their midst. And yes, of course, you can blame Israel for overreacting and being hot-headed. But as I said when you asked me my first question, what is the reaction to your child being raped to death? Fury, anger. Who wouldn't die for their child?
Yeah. Yeah, no, look, absolutely. Look, thank you very, very much for joining us and for talking to us today here on GB News. And, hopefully you and your family and everyone can stay safe tonight. I know that there's potentially quite a difficult few days ahead, believe it or not, as well in this country as we face up to some protests possibly on the streets. Look, thank you very, very much. That's Paul Ferrier there, who is the editor of Jewish News. Right, look, I've got a lot coming your way in the next hour. We're going to be having a look at the police reaction in this country to anticipated protests and demonstrations this evening. We're going to be looking at France after a teacher there was stabbed by a man shouting Allahu Akbar. We're taking a global picture of how close now the world is to some kind of formal global conflict with Iran getting involved. And we will be going live to Tel Aviv, to Gaza, where that situation is very, very much hotting up. So stay tuned. And I believe as well, Nigel Farage will be joining us. He has been rebanked, so we're going to be talking about that, but we're also going to get his views on things like the Wembley Arch not being lit up in the Israeli flag and his general take on the conflict so far. But right now, it's your headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Well, good afternoon to you. It's 4 minutes past 5. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Thousands of Palestinians are fleeing northern Gaza after Israel warned residents to move south for their own safety. Israel's dropped leaflets advising 1.1 million people to leave by the end of the day, although Hamas has told civilians to ignore the order and stay put. A total siege of the enclave is being enforced with food, water, power and medicine in short supply. Israeli airstrikes are continuing, with a ground invasion thought to be imminent. The United Nations has called on Israeli authorities to withdraw the evacuation order, saying it's impossible without devastating humanitarian consequences. Well, the President of the European Commission was forced to evacuate to a shelter after arriving in Israel this afternoon. Well, Ursula von der Leyen's meeting with the Israeli President Isaac Herzog was interrupted by sirens warning of possible strikes. Earlier, the EU chief offered her solidarity with the Israeli people after last weekend's attack by Hamas, which killed more than 1,300 people. Ursula von der Leyen there visiting the Israeli town attacked by Hamas, or one of them. Meanwhile, the US Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, has reiterated that Washington's support for Israel is ironclad. The Israeli Defense Forces are continuing to gather. They're amassing tanks and troops near the border of the Gaza Strip, with a ground invasion looking likely. More than 1,700 people have died in Gaza as a result of Israeli airstrikes. Tensions also building on the northern border with Lebanon. IDF troops are on high alert there after the Hezbollah terror group said it would ignore calls for it to stay out of the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Well, London's seen a massive increase in anti-Semitic incidents since the conflict began. That's according to the Metropolitan Police. The force cited examples such as the playing of German military music and the intimidation of people outside synagogues. Several Jewish schools in North London were closed earlier over concerns for the children's safety. They'll stay that way all weekend. The government has announced an additional £3 million of funding to provide the UK's Jewish population with extra security. The Prime Minister says terrorism must not prevail in Israel or Ukraine. Rishi Sunak's been meeting Northern European allies in Sweden. The gathering comes amid concerns about the possible sabotage of an undersea gas pipeline between Finland and Estonia. He called the Joint Expeditionary Force the first line of defence against the threat posed by the Russian President Vladimir Putin.
The value of this group is our agility, our expertise in the areas that matter, particularly in supporting Ukraine right now, which we'll talk about, but also our deep commitment to the cause of upholding the rules-based international system and in particular protecting the security of the region that is very near and dear to us.
A teacher's been killed and 2 others injured in a knife attack in France. It happened at a high school in the northern city of Arras. A suspect's been arrested. Police say he is a Russian-born Chechen and a former student of the high school. One of the teachers has described what he saw.
We are all in shock. I discovered the horror of the situation when I left, since it was on my way out that I discovered one of our colleagues had been stabbed in the neck and died in front of the school. So, here we have a professor who was killed and another who was quite seriously injured.
Well, the EU is investigating the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter, after disinformation was spread in the wake of the Hamas terror attacks. In a letter sent to the platform's owner, Elon Musk, the European Commission said there were indications X is being used to disseminate illegal content, despite it being flagged by authorities. Elon Musk says the Commission should list its examples publicly, despite the questionable content being reported in the media. The investigation is the first under the EU's new tech rules on harmful content. And Nigel Farage has been rebanked for personal and business accounts. Lloyds has accepted the GB News presenter after 10 other banks rejected him. Mr Farage was involved in a public row with NatWest in July after the group closed his bank accounts because of, apparently, his political views. He says he's pleased to see one high street lender is not politically prejudiced. This is GB News. We're across the UK on TV, on digital radio and on your smart speaker too. That's it for the moment. Now back to Patrick.
Well, it's all about that continuing conflict in Israel. It's been a dramatic day of events. Over 1 million Gazan residents have now been ordered to flee southward. They've been given just 24 hours to do that. That deadline is now actually just a couple of hours away. Charities on the ground say that request is impossible. The UN says that it can't be done without devastating consequences. But people in Gaza are caught between Israel telling them to move out and Hamas telling them to not move out. And Israel's bombardment of the Gaza Strip continues. We brought that to you earlier on. Night has fallen in Gaza, but the only thing lighting the sky is explosions. Israel's Prime Minister has warned of difficult days to come. He swears his new cabinet in today, while the country's top general admits that the military has failed to protect its citizens. There will, I think, unquestionably, once the dust has settled on this, if the dust settles on this in the coming weeks, there will be a massive inquest, won't there, as to how any of this was allowed to happen. GB News reporter Charlie Peters is live in Tel Aviv for us right now. Charlie, thank you very much. Night has fallen. The only light that we could see around the Gaza area was the very visible light of explosions. What's the latest?
Well, sunset on Friday night in Israel means it is now Shabbat night, the Jewish day of rest in the week. But there will be no rest across Israel tonight, whether you are Palestinian or Israeli, because the fighting will continue late into the night. In the northern regions, there will almost certainly be continued skirmishes between the Lebanese Hezbollah and the IDF forces up there. There are also a realistic possibility of more shelling coming in from Syria after those dramatic airstrikes on the international airports within Syria. But the main event down in the south, of course, is those fleeing from Gaza City. Up to 1.1 million people escaping with 24 hours heading to the south on just 2 supply routes, as people expect a sustained and greater bombing campaign to come from the Israeli Air Force. Skirmishes have ceased around southern Israel, as the remainder of the Hamas terrorists in the area are either captured or killed, but that large convoy of forces preparing for that likely ground invasion into the Gaza Strip, the first since 2014, is there. Tonight, the Israeli flag carrier El Al, the national airline, will fly on Shabbat for the first time in 41 years as reservists return from around the world to join the ranks of the IDF. 360,000 reservists have been activated to sustain this fight and to replenish the supplies of manpower, the greatest asset for any army. But within that 360,000 activated, some 100 coming in from Britain. Later tonight, I'll be speaking with a British Israeli who's returned to join the fighting.
Yes, OK, Charlie, and I think I can hear some sirens going off in the background there as well. Could you just summarise for us? So there has been skirmishes, and we took some of those live from the Lebanon border with Israel. There was artillery fire there, but also there is a continued bombardment taking place in Gaza. This is live at the moment, actually, in fact. This is Gaza City, and we can see quite significant explosions actually taking place at the moment. Some concern, Charlie, that Hamas are using civilians as human shields at the moment. What do we know about that?
That's been a consistent tactic and procedure of the Hamas group for many decades now. They use their rocket artillery firing points from within civilian locations. They often embed their troops within residential buildings. Schools and hospitals are not targeted by the Israeli Air Force, but Hamas militants are known to operate in those areas. They have control of the Gaza Strip. They are the militant force there. They are the political force there. And of course, as the Israeli Air Force seeks to return fire from any point of origin from rockets that leave the Gaza Strip, they have to account for the fact that it is almost certainly going to be striking into an area where civilians are present. And so the Israelis have a number of tactics that they deploy in order to minimize the threat to civilians. They often do something called a knock and drop, where if they are targeting a building where they suspect civilians are inside, they will thud the roof with an unarmed charge so that there's a warning and all the civilians can leave before more punitive and charged munitions arrive minutes later. It's roughly the same warning that Israelis get before rockets are launched into this area by the air raid sirens. Early this week, we actually had the remarkable situation where Hamas were directly warning Israelis of incoming rocket fire. On Tuesday at 4 p.m, they said, in an hour, we will strike Ashkelon. And strike Ashkelon they did. Hundreds of rockets headed up there. The Iron Dome here intercepting most of them, but some making direct impact. There have been direct rocket attacks landing successfully into Israeli territory every single day since this conflict began on Saturday morning. They almost certainly will continue even as the Israelis ramp up their campaign of targeting Hamas capabilities within the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, Charlie, thank you very much. It's Charlie Peters there, who is live for us from Tel Aviv. I'm going to bring in now Defence Analyst Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. Lieutenant Colonel, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. We're looking at live footage of Gaza at the moment, or at least we were anyway, where explosions were taking place. What do you make of the situation there at the moment? How long do you think it could be before there is an Israeli ground offensive into Gaza?
Well, that's a good question, Patrick, and I don't think anyone can really second-guess that. Certainly, I don't think the Israeli military or the IDF are going to broadcast to the world when their offensive is going to begin. But begin it will, and I think that your correspondent, Charlie, out there is quite right to say somewhere between the next 24 and 72 hours, we will see a move into the northern part of the Gaza Strip, hence the encouragement from Israel for those civilians living there to move south of the Wadi Gaza, which splits the strip in two parts, basically, to get out of the way. And this is part and parcel of an attempt to recognize international law, which does state that indiscriminate attacks against military and civilians in particular, is against international law. And the Israelis will want to avoid that insofar as they can. But it's a big ask, and 24 hours, as everybody else has said, is just, I mean, it's an impossible deadline.
Well, it is basically an impossible deadline, especially considering that Hamas are supposedly telling people to stay in situ and therefore using them as human shields. What we're looking at on the screen now was footage from Jordan a little bit earlier on, where in response to a former Hamas leader's calls for a global day of jihad, there were demonstrations on the streets. Similar scenes in Yemen, in Iraq, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, apparently, and also Malaysia. So those calls were met a fair amount. How much of a concerning situation is that, Stuart, that we appear to have a global uprising almost?
Well, indeed, yes. I mean, the Islamic population of the world, I mean, can't put a figure on it, but it's considerably large. And all the places that you have mentioned have got large Islamic populations. And so I don't think that by any stretch of the imagination, every Muslim is out on the streets rioting or demonstrating today. I should think it's a very small proportion. Yeah. But it just shows the power of modern communication, that a call to do that can resonate worldwide.
Well, exactly. And the reason why I asked that is if we are going to see increased military action in Gaza by Israel, which we almost definitely are, and what will come with that will be very distressing humanitarian situations, quite possibly involving children. That's the nature of the conflict, unfortunately, at the moment. Will this escalate into other nations stepping it up a notch and saying, look at what Israel is doing in Gaza, this cannot stand, and a large portion of the global community wanting to come down on Israel, basically?
Well, I think that's a very real risk, but I think we've got to be realistic here. I mean, we have to recognise that the bad guys in this instance are Hamas, and the attacks were atrocities perpetrated by them, and Israel is retaliating, and they have every right to do so. So the situation, I mean, we could go back into the politics of it until biblical times and not come up with an answer. But in the current situation, Hamas has started this, and the Israelis are going to finish it. I don't think we're looking at global conflict, but there may be a spillover regionally, and much depends.
I'm just going to cut across you very quickly, sorry, but it's because we're taking live footage now from Rome, right? So we are anticipating demonstrations in a lot of major European cities. So in Paris, we did actually earlier on today have an attack in France where an individual who was on some kind of terror watch list shouting Allahu Akbar stabbed a teacher to death. His brother and another person, also on a terror watch list, were arrested near two other schools in France. But we're expecting to see demonstrations in Paris. This is Rome, where it's just started now. We can see a lot of Palestinian flags flying there. And this is a concern for quite a few people, Stuart, that, especially here in Britain, which is that there is a ready-made population of people who are ready to clamp down on Israel, who are ready to potentially, I know there is a distinction between the people of Palestine and Hamas, and I don't want to fall into that trap, but potentially could be ready to support Hamas.
Yes, it would appear to be the case. And I think in London and Rome and Paris, etc., our political leaders have got to step up to the plate and take the kid gloves off. The right to peacefully demonstrate, I think, is very important in a modern democracy. But when you're calling for harm to be visited on other people's, then I think you cross the line. And indeed, someone was, I believe, arrested in Brighton today for doing just that, supporting Hamas, which is a prescribed terrorist organisation. Certainly in the UK and many other countries around the world. So I don't think we should be shy of that. I think we need to step up and take responsibility for the awful things that are happening and sadly about to happen in the Middle East.
That is Stuart Crawford there, Lieutenant Colonel, who is a defence analyst, just trying to give us a little bit of a global picture there. As you can tell, it's a fast-moving situation. Bombs and rockets going off in Gaza non-stop at the moment. A protest has just started in Rome. Again, I think it'll be interesting to see how, if that is dispersed, as we look ahead to potential incidents taking place in Britain this evening as well. Members of the Jewish community saying that they are not going to go outside, that they fear for their own safety. We will be coming to that very shortly. We're getting the view from around the world as many wonder, could events in the Middle East spiral into a much wider conflict? Patrick Christys, GB News, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken travelled to Qatar and held a joint press conference alongside the Qatari Prime Minister. He expressed how the US is working urgently to get hostages released, while the Qatari Prime Minister said that it's Qatar's priority to stop the war. This followed Blinken's meeting with Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas this morning in Jordan. And have a look at this. from a Washington, D.C. university earlier this week. I'm just going to play you a clip. There was a anti-Israeli, pro-Palestinian, arguably pro-Hamas protest that took place in Washington, D.C. This is how a Jewish student reacted.
No! They want our people dead! They want us killed! And so part of it, how is it allowed? How are you allowing this? Why aren't you putting us to? They want us dead! Please end it, please!
Joining me now from Washington is US political analyst Eric Ham. Eric, thank you very much. It does seem like a global tinderbox at the moment. What's America's role in all of this?
Well, America has made clear that they are going to continue to stand with Israel in this situation. It's why we see Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, doing this round robin, traveling across the region to assure allies and also to make clear that the United States is going to steadfastly stand with Israel as it continues this incursion and this military offensive.
And what's the feeling like in America in terms of how far are they going to allow Israel to go in terms of responding to these attacks? We are preparing, we think, for a ground incursion of Gaza in the coming hours or days.
Yeah, that's been a big question that has been put to U.S. officials. But the United States is pretty much boxed in here. We know that there are U.S. Americans that are dead as a result of this attack. In addition to that, there are growing concerns that some of these hostages could include Americans. And so we know that the United States is dually trying to, of course, stand with Israel, but also wants to do everything that it can to assure the safe release and passage of these potentially American hostages. And so the United States is in a very delicate balance here, willing to allow Israel to go as far as it needs to, but also recognizing what that could mean for potential Americans that are also in the crossfire.
OK, and what are the scenes like in America? We had a concerning incident that we brought there about in Washington, a pro-Palestinian, arguably, debatably anyway, pro-Hamas demonstration. We understand there is a pro-Israeli demonstration taking place now, I think, actually, in Washington as well. What is America like on this? I know that, Britain's quite divided. Europe has had quite a few incidents as well. What's America like?
Well, we're seeing a lot of demonstrations in the United States. In fact, it's become a very polarizing situation. There have been pro-Palestinian rallies across the nation. In fact, we know of one law student at New York University that put out a statement in support of the Palestinian people and, of course, had a job offer rescinded as a result. And in addition, in Congress, we know there are members of Congress who have made clear their stance on this issue, which some take to perhaps suggest that there is an affinity for Hamas. And so there has been a huge blowback. So what's taking place in Europe, what's taking place in the UK, we're seeing a lot of remnants of that here in Washington and across the country.
OK, look, Eric, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show from Washington as US political analyst Eric Ham. America is going to have a massive say in what goes on going forward, really, in terms of how far Israel is allowed to go, in terms of weaponry as well. I'm just wondering whether or not I might be able to take you to scenes that we had earlier on from Rome in Italy, just quickly, because there is a demonstration taking place there now. Yes, I can. So this is a pro-Palestine demonstration in Rome at the moment. This is live imagery. Now, as yet, it all seems relatively calm and sedate. We're expecting to see similar scenes in Paris. I wonder if we will see anything like this in London today. I understand that there are demonstrations scheduled for tomorrow. Might not just be London, by the way, of course. Could be elsewhere across the UK. It will be fascinating to see how the police deal with that. Very shortly, I'm going to be talking to Nigel Farage, who's going to be talking about all of this, but also as well that other news that he has now been rebanked by Lloyds following the old Coops debanking scandal. So make sure that you stay tuned. In just a couple of moments' time, Nigel Farage will be live on this show. But right now, it's your headlines with Aaron.
Hi there, it is 5:31. Good evening, Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. Palestinians are fleeing northern Gaza after Israel ordered more than 1 million people who live there to move south. Thousands have been leaving on foot or in cars heading for the designated Gaza River boundary, although Rafah, that's the civilian crossing into Egypt, remains shut. A total siege of the enclave is being enforced by Israel, so food, water, power and medicine is in short supply. Airstrikes continue. The deadline for residents to leave is 11 p.m. local time. That's about 9 o'clock here, when an expected ground invasion could begin. The UN has called on Israeli authorities to withdraw the evacuation order, saying it's impossible without devastating humanitarian consequences. Well, clashes have erupted elsewhere. These are pictures from the West Bank as Palestinians demonstrate solidarity with the people of Gaza. Israel has massed tanks and more than 300,000 soldiers near the Gaza Strip as that ground incursion looks increasingly likely. Tensions also building, though, on the northern border with Lebanon, where smoke's been spotted. Israeli troops are on high alert there after the Hezbollah terror group said it would ignore calls to stay out of the conflict between Hamas and Israel. President Emmanuel Macron says a knife attack on a school in the French town of Arras was the result of barbaric Islamist terrorism. The fatal stabbing left a teacher dead and 2 others injured. Emmanuel Macron added police had helped foil another attempted attack elsewhere in France. More on those stories on our website, gbnews.com, and I'll be back at the top of the next hour with a full bulletin.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Our financial markets have closed for the day. Here's how things look. The pound buys you $1.2146 and 1.1556 euros. The price of gold is £1,585 and 51 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100 closed the day at 7,599 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Welcome back. Well, GB News presenter Nigel Farage, who was famously debanked by the NatWest Group, has been accepted by Lloyds Banking Group for personal and business accounts after having been rejected by 10 banks. Well, Nigel says he's pleased to see one high street lender isn't politically prejudiced. To tell us more, here's the man himself. There we go. Nigel, well, I suppose congratulations are in order. What's gone on?
Yeah, I mean, I was beginning to lose hope, actually, Patrick. I can tell you from my experience, and for that of a huge number of people in this country, being debanked leads initially to a sort of sense of panic. What on earth am I going to do? And in my case, almost desperation, as I went to bank after bank to be told, no, we can't do your business. And I began to think at one point in June, well, what am I going to do? I mean, I'm going to have to sort of live off grid, go back to cash. So, yeah, I'm obviously very pleased that Lloyds have said they're happy to accept the business. They don't hold a position on people with legitimate political views. So that's very good news. But I think there is a very big lesson in all of this. And it's very simple. If you think that you won't be debanked or you can't be debanked, you may be making a big mistake. Do you know, in one financial year, 21-22, 250,000 people and businesses were debanked. The banks decide they don't want you, you're gone, you're out. So I would urge everybody, particularly if you're running a small business, make sure you've got a second bank account open and get on with it now, because it takes 3 or 4 months to get a business account open. It's a lengthy, difficult process. And the same for people's personal accounts. Make sure you've got another account. Don't just rely on one. You know, I'm hoping, Patrick, that the laws change. I'm hoping that people get the right enshrined in law to have a bank account. But until then, having a second bank account is like having an insurance policy. And stupidly, I didn't.
Well, you say stupidly. I mean, quite possibly because no one expected anything like this to happen, really. We didn't know the extent of the problem, did we, until you highlighted it. And now it's realised that so many people were in a position just like you. And it's taken somebody with your profile and your platform to be able to highlight that. So now that's some wise words there from Nigel, which is get yourself another bank account and get it done quickly. Congratulations for now banking with Lloyds. Nigel, look, just while I've got you, if that's all right, we are seeing, you know, ongoing devastating situations across Israel and Gaza and the Middle East, and fears that we're going to see a situation spill over onto our streets as well. A little bit later on, I'm going to be talking about Robert Jenrick's comments that if a foreign national is on our streets here openly supporting Hamas, that could well be grounds for deportation. I just want to know where you are on that.
Well, Robert Jenrick's government let them all in. I mean, they're coming in every calm day across the English Channel. They haven't got passports, they haven't got ID, they chuck those into the sea at the 12-mile line. We have no idea, literally no idea, how many people are living in this country, where they're living, what their background is. So it's all well and good for the minister to sound tough, but actually successive Conservative and Labour governments are the ones that have caused this problem. But of course, anyone that spoke out against it, oh, no, this is all in the name of diversity. And that must be a good thing. Let's see. I mean, I think the police have got a devil of a job, and it is a devil of a job. You know, it's a very fine line, isn't it, between flying a Palestinian flag and saying things that are insightful, not easy for the police. The Home Secretary has spoken strongly, but you know, just look at the reaction from the Football Association and others. There is a great degree of cowardice around this and fear. And what the police will not want to do is to stoke an even bigger rebellion. The fact we've sunk to this as a country is sickening and saddening.
Nigel, thank you very much. Nigel Farage there, making the time for us from Kent, talking initially about the fact that he's been rebanked, and also then, on top of that, I think he's expressing a lot of concerns that a lot of people like him have been raising for a heck of a long time. No, which is that if we have rapid, high levels mass migration from countries where potentially Israel is viewed as the enemy and Jews are viewed as, not in a particularly favourable way, then you at least create the situation for something like this to occur. That is Nigel Farage there, GBNews presenter. Now, media outlets all over the world are continuing to cover the Israel-Hamas war as the deadline for more than 1 million Gazan residents to flee southward looms ever closer. It's just a couple of hours away now. But the BBC in particular has been criticised for not describing Hamas militants as terrorists. UK Defence Secretary Grant Shapps said the policy is verging on disgraceful, while Defence Secretary James Cleverly has also called out the broadcaster. So, what has the UK media reaction been to this Israel-Hamas war? Where is the line? Joining me now is former executive editor of News of the World. It's Neil Wallace. Neil, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. There's a few bits and bobs that came out today, not least actually on the front of the Daily Telegraph. They didn't print a picture, which would have been deeply distressing, but they did then carry it inside. How do you think the British media has gone about covering this tinderbox of a situation so far?
I think in the main they've done a tremendous job. And I think in the main that almost all media outlets have poured their resources into this, and it has shown the value and importance of a diverse, lively press. You know, press freedom really matters, and it's showing now, and it's showing in the way that various organisations, such as your own, are calling out people like the BBC for their double standard in covering this war. You know, you can talk and reveal terrible events, but the idea that you don't then describe quite logically the perpetrators of those appalling, barbaric events as terrorists is simply appalling. I tweeted about Grant Shapps' comments this morning and got the biggest reaction I've had to a tweet in some time, almost entirely behind the idea that the BBC should do the right thing and call Hamas what they are, terrorists. And the lack of doing it has thrown in a sort of diversion, if you like, that the lovies and the woke are absolutely reveling in, that it doesn't get the coverage it gets, and they should be called out, because there is a reason why Hamas are doing what they're doing.
Neil, I'm sorry, it's just about to interrupt you, basically. I was just having a look there, and I'm hoping we might be able to bring up, again, maybe in a second, just some of the live footage that we had from Rome earlier on, because we are seeing these demonstrations right across Europe. We had Paris last night. Now, Paris, straight away, the French police came out and said, right, we're banning these protests. It's a risk to public order. They happened anyway, but they got the water cannons out, they get the batons out, they get the smoke grenades out. Rome, as it stands, seems peaceful at the moment, but this protest only started, or demonstration only started, a few moments ago, so we'll have to wait and see what happens there. What's your kind of comment, you know, as someone who's had their finger on the pulse of the British public, as former executive editor of the News of the World, you know, for years now? How do you feel the British public and this country is dealing with this situation as a whole? We await tonight for the potential for issues to kick off. Certainly over the weekend there are demonstrations planned. Are you concerned?
Yeah, I'm very concerned. I'm particularly concerned about the way that schools in North London, Jewish schools, well, in this democracy, you know, one of the oldest democracies in the world, one of the great countries of the world, that a school, 3 schools, felt compelled to tell their children not to come to school today because you may be in danger. What does that say about the extent of the grip of people who are perpetrating these kind of demonstrations at a time of international horror? Is nothing sacred? So, you know, I was listening to the radio earlier, the BBC, and they were talking to a guy in Gaza, an English passport holder, who was bewailing being the experience of being one of those forced to move south.
Yeah.
And the BBC asked him, what do you think about the Hamas, who effectively have caused all this?
Yeah.
And he blamed Israel. So the BBC are prepared to broadcast that. They're prepared to broadcast an apology, if you like, for Hamas, but will not call them out. And I think that's reflected in this country. I think the vast majority of people here will have been utterly, utterly appalled by what Hamas did on Saturday morning. There will be no sympathy for the Hamas supporters.
Yeah.
Yet, to the great horror of many people, they will be allowed to get away with it.
And I think one thing that's been a massive eye-opener for me is something that possibly people did already know deep down, which is there's a huge section of the population in this country and right across Europe who clearly hate Israel, hate Israelis. I will go as far as to say hate, I think, a lot of the Jewish population as well, who've been tearing down posters of missing persons and missing Jewish children, which makes me feel sick and angry, actually, who are, you know, very keen to celebrate, hand sweets out. What are you handing sweets out for at the celebration of Israelis being massacred, of babies being beheaded? Also, Neil, people who seem to demand an unbelievably high burden of proof in a way that they've never done for any incidents before about the decapitation of babies, for example, to the point where Israel's own Twitter account put out unbelievably distressing images to prove it, which they should never have had to have done. OK, I think we are, you know, in very, very dangerous times here in this country, Neil, at the moment.
I think that you opened by talking about the Daily Telegraph page 1 this morning, which was actually an incredibly brave position they took. They replicated, they did it the night before actually online, and that is a very, very brave thing for a national media outlet to do. And they let the reader decide. They could turn to it and see it. Online, you had to go through a number of clicks before you saw the image. But it was brought about, you're quite right, by the fact that the deniers, who literally deny white is white and black is black, that these things have happened. The truth is, disgusting, appalling, barbaric things were committed quite deliberately by these terrorists of Hamas. on Saturday morning. And they did it because they were frightened that there was growing rapprochement within the Middle East between Israel and other Arab states. They are desperate to keep the war going. And if that costs the lives of many thousands of their own citizens, they think it's worthwhile.
Should people,
and they're prepared
in
to
this
sacrifice
country, Neil?
These pictures here you've got, this is all down to Hamas.
Okay.
Hamas is doing this to these people, not Israel. Israel is simply trying to strike back against the people who butchered their babies. They are trying to get back the 150 or so kidnapped victims. And Hamas, rather than do that for their own ends, for the ends of their paymasters in Iran, are prepared to do this to their own people. That's what we should not remember. That explosion on the television now is due to Hamas.
Okay. Neil, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show.
And they'll continue to be down to Hamas.
Okay. Yep, Neil, look, thank you very, very much. It's Neil Wallace there. I'll chat to you again very soon, no doubt. He's the former executive editor of the News of the World. OK, strong stuff to finish the show now, because we have a lot of foreign students in this country. We have a lot of foreign academics in this country. And there have been calls now for anyone who praises Hamas's attack on Israel to face deportation. And I'm going to finish by discussing that. Do you think that's right? Do you think that if foreign students or foreign academics in this country or foreign nationals at all are found on the streets of Britain openly calling for more attacks against Israelis or openly intimidating the Jewish population or openly praising Hamas, is it right that they should face deportation? Patrick Christys, GB News, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle.
Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio. Welcome back. Now, foreign students, academics and workers who commit anti-Semitic acts or praise Hamas face being expelled from Britain under new plans by the Home Office. Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick has asked officials to look at how they could revoke visas on national security grounds. This comes as we've seen over the last few days students and academics expressing support for terrorist attacks on Israel by Hamas. Earlier on, I spoke to Nita Fabish as she faced abuse for putting up posters of children kidnapped by Hamas. And she was telling me how desperately awful the whole situation was and that she felt as though she was not really safe on the streets of Britain at the moment. I'm joined in the studio right now by Beth Turner, who will be filling in for Jubes and Co for the next hour.
Didn't know you'd spoken to that lady. I wish I'd known that in the run-up to today's show. I might steal a clip of that, Patrick, for tonight.
Yeah, do it. Powerful stuff. She actually fled from Israel a couple of days before. She came to Britain, put some posters up, and was just immediately
yeah, I saw the
by these
footage.
people.
I've seen the footage. Well, that ties in nicely to what we are discussing, because we're discussing whether those sorts of protests that we're going to see over the weekend, should they be banned? I'm sure you've been covering that in the last couple of hours as well. I've got Martin Daubney and Paul Embry.
Martin Daubney's been on fire today.
Martin is on fire on this topic, so we're going to be discussing that. And also about asking people at home whether they're feeling pressure to take a side.
Yeah.
You know, we live in this culture now where you have to have a position on everything.
I think a lot of people are going to shift. I think people initially saw what happened, the actions that Hamas did, and we massively pro-Israel. And then I think that the response from Israel that we're going to see, I suspect, in the coming days, might move the dial a little bit. And you're going to have those questions. How do you class a proportional response to things like babies being beheaded?
Yeah, it feels like we live in an age, don't we, where every big topic is so divisive. It sort of started with Brexit, and then it went on to lockdowns, and then we had Ukraine and Russia, and now we have this, and it feels like on a Friday night, you're not sure what you can raise at the pub with your mates. You know, there are topics which are just so incendiary to talk about, and where's that pressure coming from?
My overbearing concern is that I think for a very long time we've created a situation, hurtled headlong towards a situation in Britain that has allowed multiculturalism to not work, and that can result in a kind of powder keg, and it's something like a conflict abroad can end up playing out on the streets in Britain, and a lot of people have been warning about that for a long time. So your panel again, remind me, you got Martin Daubney,
Paul Embry, and we're also going to be talking about the surveillance state on the day that Daniel Khalif, remember the guy that escaped from prison underneath the truck? I mean, it makes us smile because it was so ridiculous. He was in court today, and we're asking whether if we'd had more surveillance, would he have got away with it? I don't know.
Hey, interesting stuff. It's one not to miss. Bev Turner will be lighting up your television screens, as she always does, for the next hour in for Jubes and Co. I'll be back on this evening, 8 till 9 p.m, with a very special show. I'll see you then.
Good evening. It's turning colder out there. A much chillier weekend ahead. There'll be some autumn sunshine and a few showers, particularly so tomorrow. We've seen some fairly wet weather today from this area of low pressure. That is starting to pull away, but behind it, we've got the colder air, and that will be very noticeable for all of us through the weekend. Still some pretty heavy downpours, though, across the extreme southeast for a time this evening before that clears away. And then we'll have showers keeping going for Northern Ireland and Northern Scotland. Getting very windy tonight across Northern Scotland, especially so through Shetland. A very blustery night here. Elsewhere, it will be the cold you notice, with temperatures well down into single figures. A much colder night in the south compared to recent nights. But there should be quite a bit of sunshine around on Saturday morning for southern Scotland, eastern and southern England. Some showers for Wales, northwest England and Northern Ireland. And we'll keep some showers going across the west coast of Scotland and in northern Scotland, where the winds will only slowly ease and the showers will fall as snow over the hills as temperatures struggle in the single digits. Further south, we might squeak into the teens, but everywhere feeling colder. And a cold start to Sunday with a greater chance of a touch of frost, certainly from northern England northwards. Again, though, many places having a sparkling start with some good spells of sunshine, a few scattered showers for Wales and a few for northern Scotland. But generally, Sunday looking dry for many and bright. And after we start close to freezing, we struggle up to 11 or 12 Celsius. Goodbye.
Who is it? We're here for the show.